My sister's luxury wedding planner called me on a random Tuesday demanding a $78,000 wire transfer or the venue would be canceled. When I calmly told her to put the property owner on the phone, she laughed, called me sweetie, and said a low-level assistant like me did not understand how high-end real estate worked. I smiled, hung up the phone, and looked at the legal deeds sitting on my desk. She was right. I did not understand her fake luxury world because I actually owned the ground she was standing on. 15 minutes later, the entire wedding was falling apart. I am Claire, 35 years old, and the undisputed black sheep of my family. I run a discreet but highly successful private equity firm specializing in distressed luxury real estate. My family, however, has no idea about my actual life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth and used your kindness against you. Growing up in our household meant constantly standing in the shadow of my younger sister Stephanie. At 32, Stephanie is a lifestyle influencer whose entire existence is a carefully curated illusion of wealth and status. My parents, Richard and Susan, have spent their entire lives enabling her delusions, treating her as the golden child, while looking at me as a convenient scapegoat and an endless source of emergency funds. They always assumed I lived a small, insignificant life. I let them believe it because it kept them out of my bank accounts. The nightmare began abruptly on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my corner office in downtown San Francisco, reviewing a commercial acquisition, when my personal cell phone started ringing. The caller ID was unknown, but the area code was from Napa Valley. I answered politely, expecting a local broker. Instead, a shrill, frantic voice pierced through the speaker without even a simple hello. It was Giselle, Stephanie's notoriously overpriced and painfully pretentious wedding planner. "Listen to me very carefully, Claire." Giselle snapped, the background noise of her rushing around echoing through the phone. "We have a massive venue emergency for your sister's wedding this weekend. The estate management is demanding an immediate wire transfer of $78,000 to secure the grounds for the rehearsal dinner and the ceremony, or they are going to lock the gates and cancel everything." I sat back in my leather chair, blinking in confusion. A sudden venue fee of nearly $80,000 less than 48 hours before a wedding was not just highly irregular, it was entirely absurd in the luxury event industry. Contracts are locked in months, sometimes years in advance. I asked Giselle to slow down and explain exactly what this sudden fee was for. She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, clearly annoyed that she had to explain anything to me. "Stephanie told me you are just a low-level administrative assistant, so I will use small words for you," Giselle sneered. "High-end luxury estates have insurance riders and last-minute premium holding fees. Your parents promised me that you have a significant amount of savings piled up since you have no husband, no children, and no real life of your own to spend it on. I need you to transfer the funds to my agency account immediately so I can pay the venue, or your sister's dream wedding is completely ruined, and it will be entirely your fault." The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the air. My parents had actually directed this woman to extort me, feeding her lies about my career to justify draining my supposed life savings. They painted me as a sad, lonely spinster who owed her glamorous sister a wedding venue. I felt a cold wave of clarity wash over me. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my career or my relationship status. I simply spoke with the quiet authority I used in boardrooms. "I am not wiring you a single dime, Giselle. If the venue is demanding a sudden premium fee, put the property owner on the phone right now. I will negotiate the contract directly with them." Giselle burst into genuine mocking laughter. "Oh, sweetie, you really do not belong in these circles, do you? You do not just demand to speak to the owner of a multi-million-dollar Napa Valley estate. You are out of your depth. Transfer the money by 5 o'clock, or I am telling Stephanie you ruined her life." She hung up on me. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, staring at the screen. 10 seconds later, my phone began to vibrate aggressively across my glass desk. It was a group text message led by my mother Susan and my father Richard. They had not even waited to see what I would do. They immediately launched a coordinated attack. "Claire, how could you be so incredibly selfish?" my mother's message read. "Giselle just told us you are refusing to help save the wedding. We let you live in our basement during community college while you figured your life out. You owe this family." My father chimed in immediately after. "Your sister has worked so hard for this beautiful aesthetic. Andre's family is paying for the month-long honeymoon in the Maldives. They are an incredibly affluent and respected African-American family in the corporate world, and we cannot look like we are broke in front of them. You need to step up and pay this venue fee right now to save our family reputation." I read the barrage of insults as they layered on the guilt, completely dismissing my boundaries. They casually brought up my community college years, conveniently leaving out the fact that I paid for it myself by working 3 jobs while they fully funded Stephanie's out-of-state tuition at a private university so she could join a top-tier sorority. They were perfectly willing to drain what they believed was every penny to my name, just so they could maintain a facade of wealth in front of Andre, my 34-year-old corporate wealth manager brother-in-law, who already looked down on me because of the lies Stephanie told him. They thought I would break. They thought the combined weight of their disappointment and the threat of ruining the golden child's perfect weekend would force me to blindly transfer the money. I did not cry. I did not type out a long, emotional paragraph defending myself or begging for their understanding. The time for seeking their approval had passed long ago. Instead, I calmly opened a new tab on my computer and logged into my private equity firm's secure corporate portal. I navigated to the real estate holdings folder. I pulled up the legal notarized deed to the exact Napa Valley estate they were currently panicking about. The holding company listed as the sole proprietor on the deed was my personal LLC. I owned the property. I had bought it 3 years ago as a distressed asset, completely renovated the vineyards, and turned it into one of the most exclusive private rental estates in Northern California. Stephanie had booked it through a third-party luxury agency, completely unaware that the owner of her dream venue was the sister she openly despised. I looked at the deed. Then I looked at the group chat, which was still exploding with messages calling me a bitter, jealous failure. I closed my laptop and slid it into my leather tote bag. I grabbed my car keys from the desk. I opened the group chat, ignored the paragraphs of manipulation, and typed a single sentence. "I am not sending a wire. I am driving up there." I locked my office door, walked out to the parking garage, and got into my car. The drive to Napa Valley takes about an hour and a half from the city, giving me plenty of time to mentally prepare for the storm I was about to walk into. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the highway. I thought about all the years I spent shrinking myself to make my family comfortable. I thought about every holiday dinner where I was seated at the edge of the table, listening to my parents brag about Stephanie's imaginary brand deals while asking me if I was still answering phones for a living. They had finally pushed too far. They were trying to extort $78,000 from me for a venue fee that literally did not exist, because my own company does not charge last-minute holding fees. Someone was lying. Either the estate manager I hired was running a scam, or Giselle and Stephanie were attempting to steal from me. Either way, I was going to find out, and I was going to burn their house of cards to the ground. As I turned onto the private tree-lined driveway of my estate, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from Stephanie. "Do not bother showing up to the rehearsal dinner tonight if you are just going to bring your negative energy and ruin my aesthetic. Stay away." I smiled, putting the car into park near the grand entrance. I stepped out, feeling the cool evening breeze against my face. The rehearsal dinner was already in full swing on the terrace. I could hear the string quartet playing softly in the distance. The aesthetic was perfect, but the reality beneath it was rotting, and I was the only one holding the shovel. I took a deep breath, straightened my jacket, and began walking toward the terrace. It was time to show my family exactly who they had been underestimating all these years. 10 seconds after the call with Giselle dropped, my phone began to vibrate violently across the glass surface of my desk. It did not just ring once. It buzzed in rapid, aggressive succession, the screen lighting up with notification after notification. It was the family group chat, appropriately named Family First by my mother years ago, though the title had always felt like a cruel joke. I did not need to guess what the messages were about. Giselle had clearly run straight to my parents the moment I hung up on her. My mother, Susan, launched the first attack. Her messages were long, frantic, and dripping with manipulation. "Claire, how could you be so incredibly selfish?" she typed. "Giselle just called me in tears saying you are refusing to help save the venue. We let you live in our basement during community college while you figured your life out. You owe this family." I stared at the glowing screen and let out a slow, quiet breath. My mother possessed a terrifying ability to rewrite history to suit her narrative. Yes, I lived in their basement when I was 18. What her text message conveniently left out was that she charged me $600 a month in rent while I was taking full-time business classes and working double shifts at a local diner just to keep my head above water. Meanwhile, Stephanie was attending a prestigious private university out of state. My parents fully funded her tuition, paid for her luxury dorm, covered her expensive sorority dues, and bought her a brand new car for her sophomore year so she would not have to take the bus. I paid for my own textbooks with tip money and ate cheap noodles for 3 years. Yet in my mother's mind, I was the one harboring a massive lifelong debt to them. Before I could even process the audacity of her claim, my father, Richard, chimed in. His messages were never emotional. They were always focused entirely on image status and what other people thought. "Claire, you need to fix this right now," he demanded. "Your sister has worked entirely too hard to curate the perfect aesthetic for this wedding. Andre comes from a very prominent family. You know his parents are covering the entire month-long honeymoon in the Maldives. We cannot look like we are broke in front of them. You need to step up and pay this venue fee immediately to save our family reputation. Do not make us look bad." I read his words and felt a sharp wave of disgust. I knew exactly who Andre was. At 34, my future brother-in-law was a brilliant, highly successful corporate wealth manager. He came from an affluent African-American family that had built a massive legacy in corporate law and investment banking in Chicago. His parents were genuinely wealthy, composed, and highly respected in their community. They did not need to flaunt their money because they actually had it. My parents, on the other hand, were desperately trying to match that level of prestige on a middle-class budget. They were terrified of looking inferior to Andre's family. The irony was thick enough to choke on. My father was demanding that I, the daughter they openly referred to as a glorified secretary, empty my supposedly meager life savings to maintain the illusion that they were wealthy enough to run in Andre's circles. They wanted me to bankrupt myself to buy them bragging rights at a rehearsal dinner I was barely welcome at. Then came the messages from the bride herself. Stephanie never missed an opportunity to play the victim, and she had perfected the art of weaponizing her emotions. "I literally cannot stop shaking," she typed, adding multiple crying emojis for dramatic effect. "Claire, why do you always have to ruin everything for me? You are just jealous because I am getting married to a successful man, and you are completely alone. If you do not wire the money to Giselle by 5 o'clock, the venue is going to cancel my aesthetic, will be destroyed, and I will never forgive you. You are the worst sister in the world." I leaned back in my leather executive chair and watched the toxic messages continue to roll in. There was a time, perhaps a decade ago, when a digital assault like this would have sent me into a full-blown panic attack. The old me, the desperate 20-something who just wanted her family to love her, would have been frantically typing out apologies. I would have tried to explain logic to people who thrived on unreasonableness. I would have drained my bank account, taken out a personal loan, and set myself on fire just to keep them warm. But at 35, I was no longer that scared girl. I looked at their words not with anxiety, but with the cold, analytical precision I used in my private equity firm. I dissected their panic. Giselle had demanded $78,000 for a last-minute venue emergency. But anyone who actually works in high-end commercial real estate knows that luxury properties do not operate like a budget rental car counter. You do not just slap an $80,000 holding fee on an estate 48 hours before a massive event. Contracts are locked in stone months in advance. Insurance riders are prepaid. The money was a shakedown. It was completely fabricated. Someone was desperately trying to cover up a massive financial hole, and they had collectively decided that I was the perfect, clueless target to foot the bill. I realized in that moment that they viewed me entirely as a walking ATM. They completely dismissed my boundaries, my career, and my autonomy as a human being. They believed the pathetic narrative they had constructed about my life. They genuinely thought I was a quiet, unassuming administrative assistant who hoarded her pennies because she had no social life and no romantic prospects. I had allowed them to believe this lie for years because it was the ultimate shield. It kept my actual wealth, my corporate acquisitions, and my private equity success completely hidden from their greedy hands. I remembered the day I bought my first commercial property at 28. I had worked 80-hour weeks sacrificing sleep and a social life to build my firm from the ground up. When I finally closed the deal, I made the mistake of calling my parents to share the news. My mother had simply sighed heavily into the phone and asked if my new job would interfere with me helping Stephanie move into her new luxury apartment. I never shared a single financial victory with them ever again. Stephanie had spent the last 2 years spinning a massive web of lies to Andre and his family. She told them she came from generational wealth. She told them her influencer lifestyle was entirely funded by her own brilliant brand deals and sponsorships. I knew for a fact that her lifestyle was funded by secret credit cards and my parents taking out second mortgages. She probably told Andre that I was a bitter, struggling sibling who needed constant charity from the family. If Andre, a man whose entire career was built on financial transparency, risk assessment, and wealth management, knew the actual truth about the woman he was marrying, the wedding would be over instantly. My phone vibrated again, nearly sliding off the edge of the desk. Another message from Susan. Are you ignoring us? Answer me right now, Claire. Transfer the funds to Giselle or do not bother showing up to the rehearsal dinner tonight. We will tell Andre's family that you had a mental breakdown. They were issuing vicious ultimatums from a castle built entirely on sand. They thought they held all the power because they controlled the family narrative. They thought they could bully me into submission using the threat of public humiliation. They did not realize that I controlled the actual ground they were standing on. I looked down at the legal document sitting on my desk. The notarized deed to the Napa Valley estate was printed on thick, heavy paper. The holding company listed as the sole proprietor of the property was my personal LLC. I had purchased the estate out of foreclosure 3 years ago, poured millions into renovating the vineyards, and turned it into one of the most exclusive, highly sought-after private event spaces in Northern California. Stephanie had booked it through a luxury third-party broker, completely oblivious to the fact that the venue she was using to project her fake wealth to her future in-laws was actually owned by the older sister she constantly belittled. Replying to the group chat would be entirely pointless. You cannot reason with people who are fiercely committed to misunderstanding you. Typing out a defense would only give them ammunition to twist my words. Sending a picture of the deed would tip my hand too early and give them time to fabricate a new lie. They did not need a text message. They needed a reality check. They needed to feel the crushing consequences of their actions in person. I picked up my phone, swiped to bypass the barrage of insults, and closed the messaging app without typing a single word. I opened my email, forwarded Giselle's fraudulent invoice directly to my corporate legal team with a note to hold for further instructions, and slipped the phone into my pocket. I grabbed the deed to the estate, slid it into a secure folder, and placed it inside my leather tote bag. They wanted to treat me like a walking ATM to fund their delusions. It was time to show them what happened when the bank finally closed its doors. The moment I hit send on that single text message, I flipped my phone face down on my desk. I did not wait to watch the little typing bubbles appear. I already knew the absolute panic that was erupting on the other end. Susan would be gasping for air, demanding that Richard do something to control his disrespectful daughter. Richard would be furiously mashing his keyboard, threatening to disown me if I did not comply. And Stephanie would be hyperventilating, terrified that her massive, expensive lie was about to shatter in front of her wealthy future in-laws. I calmly gathered my things. I placed the heavy notarized deed to the Napa Valley estate into a secure manila folder and slid it into my leather tote bag. I locked my office door, walked down to the private parking garage of my building, and got into my car. As I started the engine, my phone began to ring. It was not a text message this time. It was a phone call from my mother. I watched her name flash across the screen for a few seconds before I reached out and pressed the decline button. Immediately she called back. I declined it again. Then came a call from my father. Then one from Giselle, the wedding planner. They were realizing that their compliant little ATM had just closed its doors and they were desperate to regain access. I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb, connected it to the car audio, and pulled out onto the streets of San Francisco. The drive to Napa Valley takes a little over an hour and a half depending on traffic, which gave me plenty of time to process the sheer audacity of what was happening. I emerged onto the highway, the steady rhythm of the road allowing me to focus my thoughts. I thought about the estate. I had purchased that property 3 years ago when it was nothing but a massive, dilapidated foreclosure. The previous owners had gone bankrupt, leaving the main house in severe disrepair and the surrounding vineyards rotting on the vine. Where others saw a massive financial sinkhole, I saw an unpolished diamond. My private equity firm acquired the property for a fraction of its potential market value. Over the next 18 months, I poured my own capital, my own sweat, and my own vision into transforming it. I completely renovated the main house, restoring the original architecture while updating it with modern luxury amenities. I hired top-tier agricultural experts to salvage and replant the vineyards. I turned it into one of the most exclusive high-end private event venues in all of Northern California. It was the crown jewel of my real estate portfolio. And through a stroke of absolute poetic irony, Stephanie had unknowingly booked my property through a third-party luxury agency. She had likely seen pictures of the grand terrace and the sweeping vineyard views on some influencer's social media page, and decided she simply had to have it for her rehearsal dinner and wedding ceremony. My family had no idea that the holding company listed on the rental contract was my personal LLC. They had never bothered to ask the name of my business. To them, I was just Claire, the boring sister who pushed papers at a low-level administrative job. They were so wrapped up in their own delusions of grandeur that they never once considered I might actually be successful. As I drove further north, the city skyline fading into rolling green hills, I thought about the $78,000 Giselle had demanded. Anyone who actually works in commercial real estate or luxury event planning knows that high-end estates do not operate like a budget rental car counter. You do not just slap an $80,000 emergency holding fee on a property 48 hours before a massive event. Contracts for venues like mine are locked in stone months, sometimes years in advance. Insurance riders are fully prepaid. Every single detail is legally bound and financially settled long before the first guest arrives. The money was a shakedown. It was a completely fabricated invoice. Someone was desperately trying to cover up a massive financial hole, and they had collectively decided that I was the perfect clueless target to foot the bill. I knew exactly why they chose me. For 35 years, I had been the family scapegoat. I was the one they blamed when things went wrong and the one they ignored when things went right. They fully expected me to be so desperate for their love and inclusion that I would blindly transfer my life savings just to be allowed to sit at the edge of the rehearsal dinner table. But they were about to learn a very hard lesson. I was not driving to Napa Valley to argue with them. I was driving there to dismantle the fake life Stephanie had built. Let me tell you about Andre, my sister's fiancé. Andre is 34 years old, a brilliant corporate wealth manager, and the heir to a highly respected African-American family from Chicago. His family built a massive legacy in corporate law and investment banking. They are genuinely wealthy, composed, and highly educated. They do not need to flaunt their money because their reputation speaks for itself. Stephanie had spent the last 2 years desperately trying to match their status. She spun a massive web of lies, telling Andre and his parents that she came from generational wealth, that her influencer lifestyle was entirely self-funded, and that her family was deeply embedded in high society. In reality, my parents were drowning in debt trying to keep up her facade. They had taken out second mortgages on their modest home just to buy her designer bags and fund her fake luxury vacations so she could post pictures online. Stephanie had built a house of cards, and Andre was the golden ticket she needed to finally make her fake life a reality. If Andre, a man whose entire career was built on financial transparency, risk assessment, and wealth management, found out that he was marrying a fraud, he would walk away without a second thought. My phone lit up again. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Dominic, the estate manager I had hired to run the day-to-day operations of the Napa property. The text read, "We have a situation with the bride's wedding planner. She is extremely agitated and demanding things that are not in the contract. Should I have security escort her off the grounds?" I smiled and pressed the voice-to-text button on my steering wheel. "No, Dominic. Let her stay. I am about 10 minutes away. I will handle her myself. Keep the catering staff on schedule and do not tell anyone I am coming." I exited the highway and turned onto the winding scenic roads of wine country. The sun was beginning to dip below the rolling hills, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. It was the golden hour, the exact time photographers love for wedding portraits. The irony was not lost on me. I was about to walk into the most perfectly aesthetic nightmare my family had ever created. I approached the private tree-lined driveway of my estate. The massive wrought iron gates were wide open, welcoming the wealthy guests Andre's family had flown in for the weekend. I drove past the manicured lawns and the perfectly aligned rows of grapevines. I could see the grand main house in the distance, its massive windows glowing warmly against the evening sky. Expensive rental cars and luxury sedans lined the circular driveway. I parked my car near the side entrance, grabbing my tote bag from the passenger seat. I stepped out of the car and felt the cool, crisp Napa evening air hit my face. I could hear the faint sound of a string quartet playing classical music on the back terrace. I could hear the low murmur of wealthy guests mingling the clinking of expensive crystal glasses and the forced, overly loud laughter of my mother trying to impress people she could not afford to stand next to. I did not feel anxious. I did not feel the familiar knot of dread in my stomach that usually accompanied family gatherings. For the first time in my entire life, I felt absolute, crystal-clear power. I walked toward the glowing lights of the terrace, my heels clicking sharply against the cobblestone path. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing, completely unaware that the actual owner of the estate was walking up the steps. I took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of my bag, and prepared to step directly into the lion's den. It was time to show them that the bank was permanently closed. The air up here smells exactly the way I designed it to smell. When I renovated this property, I specifically requested the landscapers to plant night-blooming jasmine along the stone retaining walls, ensuring that evening events would be wrapped in a soft, sweet fragrance. I can smell it now, mingling with the scent of expensive catered food and the wood smoke from the massive outdoor fire pits. The terrace is illuminated by thousands of warm fairy lights strung across the ancient oak trees, casting a golden cinematic glow over the 50 guests mingling below me. It looks like a scene pulled straight out of a luxury wedding magazine. I stand at the top of the grand stone staircase leading down to the terrace, taking in the full scope of the illusion my family has constructed. Waiters in crisp white uniforms are weaving through the crowd, carrying silver trays of oysters, caviar, and tall crystal flutes of champagne. I recognize the label on the champagne bottles immediately. It is a rare vintage I specifically ordered and stored in the estate's private cellar for high-tier corporate clients. Stephanie and Giselle must have taken it upon themselves to raid the locked premium reserves, assuming they could just add the massive upcharge to the $78,000 fake invoice they expected me to blindly pay. My eyes scan the crowd and easily locate Andre's family. They are seated near the center of the terrace, exuding a quiet, relaxed confidence. Andre's mother is wearing a breathtaking but understated emerald silk gown, engaging in a polite, low-volume conversation with one of the bridesmaids. His father is standing near the bar, nursing a single malt whiskey, looking completely at ease. They are people who have possessed wealth for generations. They do not need to be the loudest people in the room to prove they belong there. They simply exist in their space, comfortable and secure. The contrast between them and my parents is physically painful to watch. I spot my mother Susan hovering near Andre's aunt. Susan is wearing a dress that is far too flashy for a rehearsal dinner, layered in chunky jewelry that she probably bought on credit just for this weekend. She is laughing at a pitch that screams absolute insecurity, desperately trying to dominate the conversation to prove how cultured and sophisticated she is. My father, Richard, is standing a few feet away holding a heavy crystal bourbon glass. He is nodding enthusiastically at a joke he likely does not understand, his posture stiff and unnatural. They look exactly like two actors who have forgotten their lines but refuse to step off the stage. They are drowning in their own desperation to fit into a world they cannot afford. Then I see the bride and groom. Stephanie is standing near the edge of the terrace overlooking the vineyards. She is wearing a custom white silk rehearsal gown that probably cost more than my first car. She is posing holding her phone up while one of her friends records a video for her social media. She throws her head back in a practiced artificial laugh, making sure the lighting catches her perfectly styled hair. Everything is for the camera. Everything is content. But as the recording stops and she lowers her phone, I can see the tight, panicked set of her jaw. She keeps glancing toward the entrance. She is waiting for Giselle to confirm that the $78,000 wire transfer has cleared. She is waiting for the money that will keep her fake life from collapsing. Andre is standing beside her, looking incredibly handsome in a tailored suit. He looks completely oblivious to the massive financial fraud his future wife is currently orchestrating. He has a warm smile on his face as he speaks to his groomsmen. He only knows the version of the world Stephanie has painted for him. In his mind, he is marrying into a wealthy, supportive family. In his mind, I am the bitter, broke, and jealous older sister who is constantly demanding handouts and trying to ruin Stephanie's happiness. He probably wonders why I am even allowed to be associated with them. The first person to actually notice my arrival is not a family member. It is Giselle. The wedding planner is standing near the catering entrance holding a silver clipboard against her chest like a shield. She is furiously whispering instructions to a waiter when she happens to glance up toward the grand staircase. Her eyes lock onto mine. I am not the quiet, mousy administrative assistant she envisioned when she belittled me on the phone. I am wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored navy blue suit and designer heels. I am standing with the posture of a woman who spends her days negotiating multi-million-dollar commercial acquisitions. All the color instantly drains from Giselle's face. Her mouth falls open slightly and the silver clipboard slips from her hands. It hits the stone floor with a loud, sharp clatter that cuts right through the soft music of the string quartet. The sound makes my mother turn her head. Susan looks toward the catering station, irritated by the noise, and then follows Giselle's terrified gaze up the stairs. Susan's artificially bright smile instantly collapses into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She freezes, her eyes widening as if she has just seen a ghost. She reaches out and grabs my father's arm so hard her knuckles turn stark white. Richard looks over, annoyed by her grip, but when he sees me standing there, his face flushes a deep, angry crimson. They had explicitly ordered me not to come. They had issued their final ultimatum, fully expecting me to cower in my apartment, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. Showing up here uninvited, unfazed, and unapologetic is an act of ultimate defiance that their controlling minds simply cannot process. I do not hesitate. I begin to walk down the stone steps. I do not look down at my feet. I do not apologize for taking up space. For 35 years, my family conditioned me to enter rooms quietly, to stay out of the way, to make myself as small as possible so Stephanie could shine brightest. I was taught that my comfort was always secondary to her aesthetic. But tonight I take long, deliberate steps. My heels click sharply against the Italian stone. I keep my head held high, my expression entirely neutral, projecting an aura of absolute authority. As I reach the bottom of the stairs and step onto the terrace, the tension in the air becomes so thick you could cut it with a knife. The guests who do not know me sense the sudden violent shift in the atmosphere. The low murmur of polite conversation begins to die down. People turn to look at me, wondering who this woman is and why the bride's parents look like they are about to have simultaneous heart attacks. Andre is mid-sentence telling a story to his friends when he notices the awkward silence spreading across the terrace. He stops talking, his brow furrowing in mild confusion. He follows the collective gaze of the room and sees me walking purposefully toward the center of the gathering. I can see the exact moment he recognizes me from photographs. His expression hardens into one of deep annoyance and condescension. He thinks I am here to cause a petty family scene because I am jealous of his perfect bride. Finally, Stephanie turns around. The sheer terror in my sister's eyes is something I will burn into my memory forever. It is the raw, unfiltered look of a cornered animal realizing the trap has just snapped shut on its leg. She looks at me, then looks frantically at Giselle, who is still frozen by the catering station. Stephanie realizes in a fraction of a second that the money did not arrive. She realizes that her broke, pathetic older sister is standing in the middle of her multi-million-dollar aesthetic, threatening to ruin everything just by existing. But Stephanie has never fought fair. A normal person caught in a massive lie would pull me aside. A normal person would walk over, grab my arm, and beg me to step into the gardens to talk privately so we could handle the conflict away from the guests. But doing that would mean surrendering her control. It would mean stepping out of the spotlight. Instead, Stephanie decides to do what she has done our entire lives. She decides to play the victim and weaponize the crowd against me. I watch her take a deep, shaky breath. Her shoulders drop. Her face contorts into a picture of absolute heartbreak, and her eyes well up with instant, perfectly calculated tears. She is preparing to throw me to the wolves, completely unaware that I am the one who owns the forest. Stephanie takes a step forward. The forced, panicked smile vanishes from her face, replaced instantly by a trembling lower lip and perfectly timed tears. She does not walk toward me to have a private conversation. She does not ask the catering staff to give us a moment. Instead, she turns her body so that she is angled toward the majority of the guests, ensuring that she has the maximum possible audience. She takes a deep theatrical breath and projects her voice across the stone terrace. "Claire, why are you doing this to me tonight of all nights?" Her voice cracks on the last word, sounding so incredibly fragile and broken that several guests actually gasp. The string quartet, unsure of how to handle the sudden dramatic outburst, slowly stops playing mid-measure. The elegant, upbeat atmosphere of the rehearsal dinner shatters like a dropped champagne flute. The low murmur of polite conversation instantly dies out. The clinking of silver forks against porcelain plates ceases entirely. 50 pairs of eyes turn away from the beautiful vineyard views and lock directly onto me. I stand perfectly still at the base of the stone staircase. I do not cross my arms defensively. I do not look away. I keep my posture perfectly straight, my hands relaxed at my sides, holding the heavy leather strap of my tote bag. I let the absolute silence stretch for a moment, absorbing the massive wave of public humiliation they have carefully designed to break me. "Please, Claire." Stephanie continues, taking another step toward the center of the terrace, her hands clasped together in front of her chest like she is praying. "I know you have always been jealous of me. I know it has been hard for you to watch me find happiness with Andre while you are all alone. But you promised to help me. You promised to help pay the venue fee, and now Giselle is saying you are holding the $78,000 hostage just to force the estate to cancel my wedding. How could you be so cruel? It is a masterful performance. If I did not know the actual truth, I would probably feel sorry for her too. She has managed to pack a staggering amount of lies into a single tearful paragraph. She has painted herself as the innocent, trusting bride. She has painted me as the bitter, lonely, vindictive older sister who is using her life savings to hold a wedding venue hostage out of pure spite. She has deliberately announced the massive dollar amount out loud, ensuring that everyone in Andre's affluent family hears exactly how much money is allegedly at stake. The terrace is so quiet, I can hear the wind rustling through the jasmine vines. I look past Stephanie and study the faces of Andre's family. His mother is watching the scene with a tight, unreadable expression. People who possess actual generational wealth despise public scenes. They handle their financial disputes behind closed doors with lawyers and accountants, not screaming on a patio in custom silk dresses. I can see the deep discomfort radiating from Andre's parents. This is exactly the kind of trashy, dramatic behavior they would never engage in, and my sister is putting it right on display. Before I can even open my mouth to respond, my mother steps into the spotlight. Susan cannot resist the opportunity to play the long-suffering matriarch. She walks quickly over to Stephanie and wraps an arm around her trembling shoulders, pulling the golden child against her chest. Susan strokes Stephanie's hair, glaring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "Claire, this is absolutely unacceptable," Susan says, her voice loud and vibrating with fake righteous anger. She sighs heavily, a deep theatrical sound, meant to convey the exhaustion of a mother dealing with an unruly, difficult child. "I cannot believe you would show up here uninvited just to throw a tantrum and ruin your sister's special night. We have given you so much. We let you live in our home. We supported you when you had nothing. And this is how you repay us, by trying to extort your own flesh and blood." My father, Richard, steps up to form a physical wall between me and his precious younger daughter. He points a thick finger at my chest. "You are acting completely out of your mind, Claire. We are not doing this right now. You are going to apologize to Stephanie. You are going to wire those funds to the wedding planner this instant, and then you are going to leave before you embarrass this family any further." I look at the three of them standing there united in their absolute delusion. For 35 years, this exact tactic has been their weapon of choice. Whenever I tried to set a boundary, whenever I tried to assert my own independence, they would corner me. They would use shame, guilt, and public isolation to force me back into my designated role as the family punching bag. When we were younger, a public scolding like this would have caused me to completely shut down. I would have felt the heat rushing to my cheeks. I would have stuttered out an apology just to make the awful burning stares of the strangers go away. I would have done anything to buy back their temporary approval. But as I stand on the Italian stone of my own multi-million-dollar property, listening to people who are secretly drowning in debt call me a failure, I do not feel shame. I feel an overwhelming sense of clinical detachment. I am watching three rats run furiously on a wheel they do not even realize is inside a cage. They are demanding that I wire $78,000 to Giselle. Giselle is currently standing by the catering tables, looking like she is about to physically be sick. She knows who I am. She knows that I am the owner of the limited liability company listed on the venue contract. She knows that the invoice she created is entirely fraudulent, and she is watching my deeply ignorant family scream at the one person who has the power to send her to federal prison for wire fraud. Giselle does not say a word to defend them. She just slowly backs away toward the edge of the terrace, desperately trying to shrink into the shadows. I shift my gaze away from my aggressively panting father and look directly at Andre. Andre is standing a few feet away from Stephanie, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle is jumping in his cheek. He is a high-level corporate wealth manager. His entire life revolves around assessing risk, managing assets, and identifying bad investments. Right now, he is looking at me like I am the worst investment his bride has ever made. He thinks I am a chaotic, unstable liability, threatening to humiliate him in front of his wealthy parents and corporate colleagues. The guests are practically holding their breath, waiting for me to scream back. They expect a reality television-style blowout. They expect me to cry or throw a drink or run away in humiliation. They do not realize that the woman standing in front of them spends her days ruthlessly dismantling underperforming corporate assets. You do not survive in private equity by losing your temper. You survive by holding your cards close to your chest and letting your opponents bankrupt themselves. I let the heavy, uncomfortable silence stretch out for another 10 seconds. I let Stephanie's fake sobs echo off the stone walls. I let my mother's angry, theatrical sighs fill the air. I let my father's pointed finger hang in the space between us. I want them to commit completely to their lies. I want every single guest on this terrace to remember exactly what they said and how they said it. I want the contrast between their hysterical accusations and the cold, hard reality to be so incredibly sharp that no one will ever be able to dispute what happens next. I do not raise my voice to match theirs. When I finally speak, my tone is low, calm, and completely devoid of emotion. It is the exact tone of voice I use when I am terminating a business contract. "Are you quite finished?" I ask. The simple, quiet question slices through the dramatic tension like a scalpel. It is not the response Stephanie prepared for. Her fake crying hitches in her throat, and she stares at me genuinely confused by my lack of panic. Susan's mouth opens and closes like a fish out of water. Richard lowers his pointing finger, his brow furrowing as he tries to understand why I am not cowering. I take one slow, deliberate step forward. The crowd parts slightly, giving me a clear, unobstructed path to the center of the terrace where Andre is standing. I do not look at my parents. I do not look at my sister. I look directly into the eyes of the man who is about to marry into this nightmare, preparing to show him exactly what kind of family he is buying into. Andre meets my gaze with a look of profound exhaustion. He does not see a successful private equity chief executive officer standing in front of him. Thanks to Stephanie's relentless multi-year campaign of lies, Andre sees a tragic, bitter woman who has failed at every aspect of life. He gently disentangles himself from Stephanie's desperate grip, pats her hand with reassuring warmth, and takes a slow, deliberate step toward me. He is trying to play the role of the protective patriarch, the highly successful and rational man, stepping up to shield his fragile bride from her toxic, unstable relative. He adjusts the lapels of his custom-tailored suit jacket, standing tall to use his height to his advantage. When he speaks, he does not yell. He does not match the hysterical pitch of my parents. Instead, his voice is coated in a heavy, suffocating blanket of pity and deep annoyance. It is the exact tone a busy professional might use to placate a toddler throwing a tantrum in the middle of a high-end grocery store. "Claire, I think we all need to take a step back and take a deep breath." Andre begins, his deep voice carrying easily across the silent terrace. "Stephanie has been incredibly transparent with me about your financial struggles over the years. She told me how hard it is for you to make ends meet on a basic administrative salary in a city as expensive as San Francisco. I sympathize with your situation. I truly do. Life has not been easy for you." I do not flinch. I let him dig the hole deeper, standing perfectly still as he recites the pathetic biography my sister invented for me. "But trying to sabotage this beautiful weekend just because you feel inadequate is completely unacceptable." Andre continues, his tone growing sharper, the pity giving way to stern condescension. "Trying to hold my wedding venue hostage 48 hours before the ceremony out of pure spite is not just petty. It is genuinely pathetic. You are stressing out your parents, you are humiliating yourself, and you are hurting the woman I love." Andre reaches into the inside breast pocket of his jacket. He pulls out a sleek leather-bound checkbook and a heavy silver fountain pen. The collective intake of breath from the guests is audible. I glance quickly at Andre's parents sitting a few tables away. His mother looks absolutely mortified, closing her eyes and pinching the bridge of her nose. People with generational wealth despise flashy displays of money to solve personal disputes. Writing a massive check to make a loud family member go away in front of 50 guests is extremely gauche, and Andre knows it. But he is a corporate wealth manager. He solves high-level financial crises for a living. To him, $78,000 is an annoyance, a rounding error in a massive portfolio, and he is willing to spend it right now just to make the trashy family drama stop. He clicks the pen with a sharp, decisive, metallic snap. "If this is really about the money, Claire," he says loudly, ensuring every single person on the terrace hears him. "If you are truly that desperate for cash that you would try to extort your own sister on the eve of her wedding, then let me resolve this issue for you right now." He flips the checkbook open. "Do I need to write the check for you, Claire, so we can finally move on with our evening?" "Because I will. I will write this check for $78,000 right now. I will hand it directly to Giselle to cover whatever ridiculous venue emergency has popped up, and then I want you to turn around, get back in your car, and leave my fiancé alone. You can keep your little savings account intact. Just take the bailout and leave." Susan is standing behind him, practically glowing with smug satisfaction. My mother thinks Andre has just delivered the ultimate crushing blow. She thinks the wealthy, successful groom has swooped in, established absolute dominance, and put the pathetic older sister right back in her miserable place. She expects me to crumble under the sheer weight of his charity. But when I look past Andre and focus on Stephanie, I do not see relief. I see sheer, unadulterated panic. Stephanie is staring at the checkbook in Andre's hand like it is a ticking bomb. Her face has lost all its color. Her fake tears have completely dried up, replaced by wide-eyed terror. It takes only a second for me to understand why. If Andre writes a personal check directly to Giselle to cover the venue fee, Giselle will be forced to cash it. And Andre, being a meticulous wealth manager, will inevitably demand an itemized receipt from the estate management for his tax records. He will audit the transaction. He will want to see the paper trail for an $80,000 sudden expense. Stephanie knows that Andre's money cannot fix a lie of this magnitude. Her scam requires untraceable cash. She needs me to pay the money blindly so she can secretly funnel those funds to her aggressive creditors without Andre ever seeing a single bank statement. If Andre pays the wedding planner directly, his corporate accountants will eventually discover the massive financial hole Stephanie has been hiding. The very check he is holding up to humiliate me is actually the weapon that will destroy her fake life. Before I can respond to Andre's ridiculous offer, my father decides he needs to assert his own authority and regain control of his obedient daughter. Richard closes the distance between us in 3 long, angry strides. He does not care that we are standing in front of dozens of affluent strangers. He grabs my right arm, his thick fingers digging painfully into the fine wool fabric of my suit jacket. His grip is bruising and relentless. It is the exact same hand that used to affectionately pat Stephanie's head when she brought home average grades while casually waving away my academic achievements. It is the grip of a man who is terrified of being exposed as a fraud, lashing out at the one person he believes he can still control. "Take the money and get out," Richard hisses. He leans in close to my ear, his breath smelling heavily of expensive bourbon and cheap desperation. His voice drops to a harsh, guttural whisper, meant only for me, venom dripping from every single syllable. "You are an absolute disappointment to this family. You always have been. Take his check, wire the funds to Giselle so the venue is secured, and do not ever show your face to us again. Fix this right now, Claire. Do not make me tell you again. If you ruin this for your sister, I swear to God you are dead to me." I look down at my father's hand gripping my arm. He actually believes his physical intimidation will work. He actually thinks Andre's money will save them from the corner they have painted themselves into. He thinks Giselle's fake invoice is real, completely unaware that his beloved golden child has been using him as a pawn in a massive embezzlement scheme. I do not struggle against his hold. I do not widen my eyes in fear or look around for someone to rescue me. I simply look at his thick fingers pressing into my sleeve, and then I slowly raise my gaze to meet his furious, bloodshot eyes. I let him see the absolute emptiness staring back at him. There is no love left to exploit. There is no desperate daughter seeking his approval anymore. There is only a highly successful woman standing on her own property, looking at a trespasser. I slowly raise my left hand and place it over his gripping fingers. I do not yank my arm away in a panic. I simply apply enough localized pressure to his knuckles to let him know with absolute certainty that he is crossing a physical boundary I will no longer tolerate. He gasps slightly, his grip loosening in surprise, as he realizes I am not backing down. "I am not a disappointment, Richard," I say softly, ensuring my voice is steady and completely devoid of the fear he is trying to provoke. "And you are not in charge of me." I calmly shake off his hand, letting my arm drop back to my side. I smooth the wrinkled fabric of my jacket with deliberate, agonizing slowness. I look at Andre, whose checkbook is still suspended in the air, and then I look past him to Giselle, who looks like she is ready to sprint for the parking lot. The entire terrace is frozen, waiting for my counter move. They threw their best punch, trying to bury me under a mountain of pity, condescension, and physical intimidation. Now it is my turn to bring the mountain down on them. Giselle's laughter echoes across the stone terrace, high-pitched and incredibly forced. She claps her hands together in a frantic, dismissive gesture, looking around at the guests, as if trying to conduct their reactions. "Oh my God, please do not listen to her," Giselle stammers, her voice trembling despite her volume. She is completely delusional. Stephanie warned me that her sister had a habit of making up wild stories for attention, but this is just sad. She does not own this estate. I booked this venue through a highly exclusive corporate agency. She is just trying to ruin Stephanie's perfect night because she is bitter. My parents immediately jump onto Giselle's sinking lifeboat. Susan gasps dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest. She turns to Andre's mother, who is sitting completely motionless at the head table. "I am so incredibly sorry you have to see this," Susan says, her voice dripping with fake embarrassment. Claire has always struggled with reality. We tried to get her help, but she just harbors so much deep-seated jealousy toward Stephanie. She is clearly having some sort of mental breakdown. Richard steps forward again, though this time he keeps his hands to himself. "You need to leave right now, Claire," he demands, his face purple with rage. "Are you out of your mind, claiming you own a multi-million-dollar property? You push papers in a cubicle. You are embarrassing yourself and you are humiliating this family. Get off this property before I have the estate security forcibly remove you." I let them talk. I let them layer their lies and their insults, allowing every single guest to hear the absolute vitriol they are willing to spew to protect their golden child. I do not defend my career. I do not shout over them. I simply keep my eyes locked on Andre. Andre is a man who makes his living analyzing data, assessing risk, and reading people. He deals with high-stakes financial negotiations every single day. While my parents are busy screaming and Giselle is hyperventilating, Andre is watching me. He sees my relaxed posture. He sees that I am completely unfazed by the threat of security. And then he looks at Stephanie. Stephanie is not joining in on the chorus of insults. She is standing perfectly still, her face drained of all color, staring at me with a look of absolute paralyzing terror. She knows me. She knows I do not make empty threats. And Andre sees that terror. His analytical mind is rapidly processing the scene. A delusional woman having a breakdown would be erratic, emotional, and defensive. I am standing here like a corporate executive who has just caught a contractor embezzling funds. Andre slowly lowers his checkbook. He does not put it away because I told him to. He puts it away because his professional instincts are screaming that something is fundamentally wrong with this transaction. "Wait a minute," Andre says, his deep voice cutting through my father's rant. The terrace goes quiet again. Andre takes a step away from Stephanie and looks directly at Giselle. "You said you booked this through a corporate agency. Who is the actual owner listed on the venue contract?" Giselle freezes. Her mouth opens but no sound comes out. She looks at Stephanie, begging for help, but Stephanie is completely paralyzed. "Well," Andre presses his tone, shifting from the annoyed groom to the relentless wealth manager. You are demanding an $80,000 emergency fee. You must have the contract with you. Who is the property owner? It is a holding company. Giselle stammers, sweat visibly beading on her forehead. A limited liability company. I do not have the exact name memorized, it is just corporate paperwork. It does not matter. The fee is required by the management. It matters to me if I am writing a check for it. Andre snaps back. He turns to me, his eyes narrowed, calculating. You are making a massive claim, Claire. You are standing in front of my family claiming you own one of the most exclusive pieces of real estate in Napa Valley. If you are lying, I will personally see to it that you are removed from the premises. But if you are telling the truth, I want to see the proof, right now. My parents start to protest again. Andre, do not entertain her insanity, Susan pleads. But Andre holds up a hand, silencing my mother instantly. He wants facts, not family drama. I do not reach into my tote bag for the deed. Handing him a piece of paper would just invite Giselle to claim I forged it. A piece of paper can be debated. A living, breathing witness cannot. I do not need to show you a piece of paper, Andre, I say calmly. I reach into my pocket and pull out my cell phone. I unlock it and dial a number. The guests watch in absolute silence as I bring the phone to my ear. It only rings twice before he answers. Dominic, I say into the receiver, my voice steady and professional. I apologize for interrupting the catering schedule. Could you please step out onto the main terrace for a moment? We have a slight administrative issue that requires your clarification. I hang up and slide the phone back into my pocket. My father lets out a scoff of disbelief. Who did you just call your imaginary real estate broker? I do not answer him. We all stand there in the tense, heavy silence. The string quartet is still sitting frozen with their instruments. The catering staff has stopped moving. The only sound is the gentle rustling of the wind through the vineyards and the crackling of the outdoor fire pits. The seconds stretch out, feeling like hours. I can see the panic rising in Giselle's chest. She keeps looking toward the exit, calculating her chances of making a run for the parking lot. Then the heavy oak doors leading from the main house to the terrace swing open. Dominic steps out. He is impeccably dressed in his estate manager uniform, a tailored suit with a discreet earpiece and a silver clipboard tucked under his arm. He is a man in his late 50s, highly respected in the Napa Valley hospitality industry, and he carries himself with absolute authority. He stops at the top of the stairs, quickly assessing the bizarre scene before him. He sees the silent guests, the furious bride, the confused groom, and finally he sees me. You asked to see me, Ms. Claire, Dominic says, his voice carrying the respectful professional tone of an employee addressing his employer. The sound of him using my name in that manner sends a physical shockwave through my family. Susan's jaw literally drops open. Richard takes a step back, blinking rapidly, as if he has been slapped. Stephanie lets out a tiny, involuntary whimper. Yes, Dominic, I reply, turning to face him. I apologize for pulling you away from the kitchen. Could you please clarify something for the groom? My sister's wedding planner seems to be confused about the ownership of this estate. Could you please tell everyone here who owns this property and who signs your paychecks? Dominic walks slowly down the stone steps. He looks at Giselle, whom he has been arguing with all week regarding her unreasonable demands. Then he looks at Andre. Dominic stands up straight, adjusts his clipboard, and delivers the final crushing blow with perfect clarity. Ms. Claire is my boss, Dominic announces to the silent terrace. Her private equity firm purchased this entire estate 3 years ago. She holds the sole deed to the property. She approves all contracts, all renovations, and all event approvals. She is the owner. The collective gasp from the guests is intoxicating. It ripples across the terrace like a wave, followed instantly by a frantic whispered murmuring among Andre's family. The illusion shatters completely, raining down on my parents and my sister in sharp, jagged pieces. They cannot call Dominic a liar. He is wearing the estate's insignia. He has been directing the staff all evening. He is the undeniable reality they tried to gaslight me out of. I look at my mother, whose face has turned the color of ash. I look at my father, who is staring at the ground, completely stripped of his arrogant bravado. And then I look at Stephanie, the golden child who is finally forced to stand in the harsh, unforgiving light of truth. I turn my attention back to Andre. He looks like he has been struck by lightning. The checkbook is still in his hand, but his eyes are fixed on me, reevaluating everything he thought he knew about his future sister-in-law. So, Andre, I say, my voice ringing clear and steady over the whispering crowd. As the legal owner of this property, I can assure you that there is absolutely no $78,000 emergency venue fee. My estate does not charge last-minute premiums. The property was fully paid for months ago. I pause, letting the weight of my words sink into his analytical mind. I look directly at Giselle, who is visibly shaking, and then at my sister, which means I continue softly. The only question left to answer tonight is why your bride and her wedding planner are trying to extort $80,000 from you in fake charges. The trap is officially sprung. The house of cards is collapsing, and I am standing back to watch the wreckage. The aftermath of my question hung in the cool Napa Valley air like a heavy fog. I watched Andre's face transform. The condescending pity he had shown me just minutes earlier evaporated entirely. In its place was the sharp, calculating focus of a man who managed billions of dollars in corporate wealth for a living. He looked down at the silver fountain pen and the leather checkbook still clutched in his hands. He had been seconds away from writing a check for $78,000 to cover an emergency venue fee that simply did not exist. He slowly closed the checkbook. The crisp snap of the leather cover echoed loudly across the silent terrace. Andre turned his entire body away from me and focused solely on Giselle. The wedding planner had backed herself almost entirely into the catering station, trying to shrink behind a tall floral arrangement. Giselle, Andre said, his voice dangerously low and remarkably steady. You told me this morning that the estate management called you directly. You told me they threatened to lock the gates and cancel the caterers if this premium was not paid by tomorrow morning. You produced an invoice with a corporate letterhead. Giselle swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Andre, Stephanie, and me. She tried to force a professional smile, but her lips were trembling so violently it looked like a grimace. There must be a misunderstanding, Giselle stammered, clutching her clipboard to her chest like a life preserver. A third-party booking fee, perhaps. I deal with so many different vendors, Andre. Sometimes the holding companies change their policies without notifying the planning agencies. It was just a miscommunication. I am sure we can clear this up tomorrow during regular business hours. I did not let her get away with that. There is no third-party booking fee, I stated clearly, stepping closer to the center of the group so my voice carried to the back of the terrace. My limited liability company owns this property outright. We do not use third-party booking agencies for events. We handle all contracts in-house. I personally reviewed the final contract for this weekend because it was a high-profile booking. The venue was paid in full 3 months ago. There are no outstanding balances, no hidden premiums, and certainly no $78,000 emergencies. Andre stepped toward Giselle, closing the distance between them. I want to see the physical paperwork, he demanded. Right now. I want to see the exact invoice you were about to have me pay. Giselle took another step back, shaking her head frantically. It is on my laptop in the bridal suite, she lied, her voice cracking. I can go get it right now, just give me a few minutes to print it out for you. You are not going anywhere, Andre snapped. He was in full corporate audit mode now. He recognized the classic signs of financial fraud because he spent his entire career protecting his clients from it. You are not leaving this terrace. Open your phone, pull up the digital document, and show it to me. When Giselle could not produce the phone, actively refusing to make eye contact with him, Andre slowly turned his attention to his bride. Stephanie looked like she was about to collapse. The beautiful custom silk gown suddenly looked like a straitjacket. Her chest was heaving, and she was gripping the edge of a high-top cocktail table so tightly her knuckles were white. The golden child was finally being forced to answer a question she could not cry her way out of. Stephanie Andre said, his tone completely devoid of the romantic warmth he had displayed all evening. You have been crying all day about this fee. You told me your parents were completely tapped out and that you were begging your sister to help cover it. If the venue is fully paid for, where was that money actually going? Stephanie's mouth opened and closed. She looked at our parents silently, begging them to step in and save her, but Susan and Richard were completely paralyzed. For the first time in their lives, they had absolutely no idea what was happening. They had genuinely believed the venue fee was real, because Stephanie had lied to them too. They thought I was just being stubborn and withholding money to ruin the wedding. They were just now realizing that their perfect daughter had fabricated a massive financial crisis. I need you to answer me, Stephanie Andre pressed, raising his voice for the first time. Why did you tell me your sister was a struggling administrative assistant when she clearly owns a massive commercial real estate portfolio? Why did you need $80,000 in untraceable cash 48 hours before our wedding? What is going on here? Stephanie started to hyperventilate. It is not what it looks like, Andre, she cried, reaching out to grab his arm. Please, you have to listen to me. Claire is just trying to confuse you. She hates me. She has always hated me. Do not let her do this to us. She is probably lying about owning the venue just to ruin my aesthetic. She probably paid that man to say those things. Andre looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then pulled his arm away with a look of absolute disgust. I am not confused, Stephanie, he replied coldly. I am looking at a property owner telling me my venue is free, and I am looking at my fiancé, who was just trying to pressure me into writing a massive check to a third party. Do the math for me. Explain to me why your wedding planner is terrified to show me an invoice. The whispering among the guests grew louder. Andre's mother, sitting at the head table, finally stood up. She smoothed the front of her emerald silk gown, her face a mask of dignified fury. She whispered something to Andre's father, who immediately set his whiskey glass down and stood up beside her. They did not need to scream or make a scene. Their posture communicated everything. They were looking at my family like we were a disease they had just been exposed to. Seeing Andre's affluent parents stand up in disgust was the final trigger for my own parents. Susan and Richard worshipped the ground wealthy people walked on. The thought of losing this highly lucrative connection to Andre's family sent them into a blind, desperate panic. They could not control Andre. They could not control the guests. But they still believed in their arrogant, deeply flawed minds that they could control me. They believed that if they could just get me out of the room, they could spin a new lie. They could tell Andre I was insane, that the estate manager was a paid actor, that it was all a massive misunderstanding caused by my severe jealousy. They needed to silence the source of the truth before Andre asked any more questions about the money. Richard moved first. He lunged across the space between us, completely abandoning any pretense of upper-class etiquette. He grabbed my right arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with enough force to leave a bruise. Susan flanked my left side, her acrylic nails sinking into my other arm. We are so incredibly sorry, Andre Susan practically shouted over the murmuring crowd, flashing a manic, terrifying smile. Claire is clearly unwell. We are going to take her inside to calm her down. Please, just enjoy the champagne. We will handle this family matter privately. I did not fight them immediately. I let them drag me away from the center of the terrace, their grips painfully tight, as they practically hauled me toward the heavy oak doors of the main house. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to isolate me. It was the exact same tactic they used when I was a teenager. Whenever I brought up their unfair treatment or caught Stephanie in a lie, they would drag me into a back room corner, and scream at me, until I backed down and accepted their version of reality. They pulled me through the doors and into the grand, dimly lit hallway of the estate, letting the heavy wood swing shut behind us to muffle the sounds of the terrace. The moment we were out of sight from the guests, their fake smiles vanished. The panicked parents disappeared, replaced by the cruel, calculating enablers I had known my entire life. Susan released my arm, and immediately stepped directly into my personal space, her face inches from mine. She was breathing heavily, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. Richard stood directly behind me, blocking my path back to the doors. They had me cornered in my own house, preparing to deploy the most toxic, unforgivable weapon they possessed. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, cutting off the soft melodies of the string quartet and the confused murmurs of the guests outside. The grand hallway of my estate was quiet, illuminated only by antique brass sconces that cast long, distorted shadows against the wainscoting. This was my house. I chose the paint. I restored the hardwood floors. Yet Susan and Richard stood in my hallway acting like they were the wardens and I was their prisoner. Susan's face was a mask of sheer panic and rage. She stepped directly into my personal space, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "How could you do this to us? Do you have any idea how bad you are making Stephanie look in front of Andre's parents? They are a highly respected corporate family, Claire. They do not tolerate this kind of chaotic, low-class behavior." I stared at her, genuinely marveling at her ability to completely ignore reality. "I am making her look bad. Susan, your daughter, and her wedding planner just tried to extort $80,000 from her fiancé using a fake invoice. I did not create this chaos. I just refused to fund it." Richard stepped closer, his chest puffed out, still trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. He stood directly between me and the doors leading back to the terrace, effectively blocking my only exit. "You are going to fix this," he demanded, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. "You are going to walk back out onto that terrace right now. You are going to tell Andre that you made a massive mistake, that the venue management does require the premium fee, and that you were just confused about the corporate paperwork. You are going to apologize to Stephanie in front of everyone. I am not going to lie to a man who is about to marry into a financial sinkhole," I replied evenly. Susan shook her head, her eyes darting around the hallway like a cornered rat looking for an escape route. "You are not just going to apologize," she said, her voice dropping into a menacing register I had not heard in years. "You are going to transfer the deed of this estate into Stephanie's name. You are going to give her this property as a wedding gift. It is the only way to prove to Andre that she comes from the level of wealth she told him about. If she owns this estate, it will legitimize her in his eyes and cover up this entire misunderstanding." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her demand actually made me let out a short, dry laugh. They were not just asking me to cover a fake $80,000 invoice anymore. They were demanding I hand over a multi-million-dollar commercial asset that I had spent years acquiring and renovating, all to serve as a prop in Stephanie's pathetic fantasy life. "You are completely out of your minds," I said, my tone laced with absolute disgust. "I am not giving my sister my real estate portfolio to cover up her fraud. This conversation is over. I am going back outside, and I am telling Andre the exact truth." I turned to walk back toward the heavy oak doors. That is when Richard pressed his back against the wood, completely blocking my path. He crossed his arms over his chest, his face hardening into a look of absolute malice. "If you walk back out there without agreeing to sign over this property, we will ruin you." Richard spat, every word dripping with venom. "We will go straight to Andre's parents. We will sit down with his affluent, image-conscious family, and we will tell them exactly what happened to you when you were 22. The air in the hallway suddenly felt very cold. I stopped in my tracks. Susan stepped up beside him, a cruel, triumphant smile creeping onto her face. She knew she had hit the nerve. "That is right," she whispered. "We will tell them all about your little mental breakdown. We will tell them how you could not handle the pressure of college, how you completely fell apart, and how we had to have you involuntarily committed to a psychiatric ward for a month." They were talking about the darkest, most vulnerable period of my life. When I was 22, I was working 3 jobs while carrying a full course load to pay for my own education, all while enduring the relentless emotional abuse of my parents, who constantly compared my exhaustion to Stephanie's easy, fully funded sorority life. My body and mind simply gave out. I suffered a severe depressive episode and crippling panic attacks. I checked myself into a mental health facility for 30 days to get the clinical help I desperately needed. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, and it was the turning point that allowed me to rebuild my life, start therapy, and eventually become the successful woman I am today. But to my parents, my hospitalization was not a story of survival. It was a weapon. It was their ultimate proof that I was defective. For over a decade, they had held that month over my head, threatening to expose my medical history to my friends, my colleagues, and my employers whenever I tried to step out of line. Andre's family is very traditional. Susan continued, her voice practically purring with malice. They value stability and reputation above all else. How do you think they will react when they find out their son's new sister-in-law is a clinically unstable liability? They will be disgusted by you. They will think you are a chaotic, broken woman who is making up lies about owning real estate because she is having another psychotic break. Who do you think they will believe? The wealthy, successful parents of the bride, or the spinster sister with a documented history of psychiatric hospitalization? I stood there in the dim light of the hallway, looking at the two people who were supposed to love and protect me unconditionally. They were perfectly willing to weaponize my deepest trauma. They were willing to exploit a medical crisis they had directly contributed to, all to steal my property and save the golden child from facing the consequences of her own actions. A younger version of me would have crumbled. The 22-year-old girl who cried herself to sleep in that hospital room would have fallen to her knees begging them not to expose her secret. She would have signed over everything she owned just to keep her shame hidden from the world. But the 35-year-old woman standing in this hallway did not feel shame. I felt liberated. Their threat was the final, definitive swing of the axe that severed any remaining emotional ties I had to these people. The last shred of hope that they might one day love me evaporated into the air, and I was entirely free. I looked at my mother's smug face, and then at my father's arrogant posture blocking the door. I did not cry. I did not hyperventilate. I calmly reached into my leather tote bag. I was not reaching for the property deed. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder I had retrieved from my corporate office earlier that afternoon. "Go ahead," I said softly. Susan's cruel smile faltered. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice losing its confident edge. I took a step closer to them, my voice dropping to a glacial, unyielding calm. I said, "Go ahead. Walk out there and tell them. Tell Andre's family that I went to a hospital for depression 13 years ago. Tell them I struggled. Tell them whatever you want." Richard blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my lack of panic. "You think we will not do it? You think we are bluffing?" "I know you are not bluffing," I replied, staring directly into his eyes. "But you are completely failing to understand the situation. I do not care what Andre's family thinks of my medical history. I am not marrying into their family. I do not need their approval, their money, or their social status. I am completely independent." I tapped the heavy manila folder against my leg. "You think my past is the most destructive secret in this hallway? You are wrong. While you two are threatening to expose a hospital visit from a decade ago, I am holding the actual financial records that prove your precious golden child is currently committing felony wire fraud." Susan swallowed hard, the color draining from her face as she looked at the folder. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "You have been so blindly focused on protecting Stephanie's fake aesthetic that you never bothered to ask why she needed $80,000 in untraceable cash today," I said, my voice cutting through their delusions. "She does not need it for a venue fee. She needs it because she is drowning in secret credit card debt to maintain her influencer lifestyle. Andre's corporate firm is about to run a mandatory background and credit check on her before they finalize his new partnership. She is trying to extort money from me to pay off her creditors before Andre finds out she is a massive financial liability." My parents stood frozen, their mouths slightly open, completely unable to process the magnitude of the lie they had been defending. The absolute certainty in my voice shattered their false reality. Now I said, stepping right up to my father and looking him dead in the eye. Move away from my door, or I will have my estate security physically throw you off my property for trespassing. Richard hesitated for a fraction of a second, but the absolute authority in my posture broke his resolve. He slowly stepped aside, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and walked back out onto the brightly lit terrace, leaving my parents standing alone in the dark. The scene outside had not improved. The guests were still deathly quiet. Andre was still standing exactly where I left him, his arms crossed over his chest, his posture rigid with fury as he stared down at Stephanie. Stephanie was crying real tears now, realizing her parents had not successfully silenced me. I walked straight past the head table, ignoring the shocked stares of the affluent guests, and marched directly toward the groom. It was time to hand over the evidence and watch the golden mask shatter completely. The heavy manila folder felt like a block of lead in my hands as I closed the final few feet between myself and Andre. The terrace was so completely devoid of sound that the rhythmic clicking of my heels against the stone seemed to echo across the vineyards. Stephanie saw the folder and let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. She took a frantic step forward, her hands outstretched as if she were going to physically tackle me, but Andre immediately threw his arm out, blocking her path. He did not even look at her. His eyes were locked entirely on the documents in my hand. I stopped right in front of him. I did not look at my sister, and I did not look at the wedding planner cowering by the catering tables. I kept my focus squarely on the man whose life was about to be irreversibly altered. You do not need to wait for Giselle to miraculously find a corporate invoice on her laptop. Andre, I said, my voice projecting clearly into the cool night air. Giselle is never going to show you that paperwork, because it simply does not exist. But I brought something much more important for you to review. I held out the thick folder. Andre took it from my hands without a second of hesitation. He flipped it open, this ambient light from the overhead fairy lights illuminating the crisp, heavily highlighted financial documents inside. Andre is not a man who gets confused by numbers. He is a senior wealth manager who spends his days dissecting complex portfolios, identifying corporate liabilities, and predicting market failures. It took his highly trained analytical brain less than 5 seconds to recognize exactly what he was holding. He was not looking at venue contracts. He was looking at credit card statements, personal loan agreements, and final collection notices. What you are holding, I explained, keeping my tone as detached and professional as if I were leading a board meeting, is the actual financial reality of your future wife. Stephanie has spent the last 2 years convincing you, your parents, and thousands of strangers on the internet that she is a highly successful lifestyle influencer. She told you her designer clothes, her luxury vacations, and her flawless aesthetic were funded by lucrative brand deals and inherited family wealth. That is a complete fabrication. Andre slowly turned the first page, his eyes darting across the columns of numbers. The muscle in his jaw was jumping frantically. Your bride does not have brand deals. I continued, making sure my words reached the head table where Andre's affluent parents were sitting in stunned silence. She has crippling, unmanageable debt. She currently owes over $150,000 across 6 different high-yield credit cards and 2 unsecured personal loans. Those designer bags she flaunts were bought on credit. Her luxury trips were funded by payday lenders with astronomical interest rates. She has completely drained whatever small savings she had, and she has been aggressively dodging collection agencies for the past 4 months. Stop it, Stephanie shrieked. Her voice tore through the air, raw and desperate. She lunged forward again, her fingers clawing at the folder in Andre's hands. Do not look at that, Andre. Please do not look at it. She forged those. She is a liar. She is just trying to destroy us. Andre did not yell, but his reaction was far more terrifying than any shout could ever be. He simply stepped back, gripping the folder tightly to his chest, and gave Stephanie a look of such absolute freezing disgust that she instantly recoiled. He looked at her not as a lover, but as a catastrophic financial liability that he had almost legally attached to his name. "Why the sudden emergency today?" Andre asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. He was piecing it together, but he wanted me to confirm the timeline. "Why demand $78,000 48 hours before the ceremony?" "Because of your promotion," I answered smoothly. "You told the family last month that your corporate firm is officially elevating you to a senior partnership. But to finalize that partnership, the board of directors requires a mandatory, exhaustive financial background check on you and your spouse. They check everything to ensure their partners are not susceptible to blackmail or financial coercion. Stephanie knew that the moment you signed your marriage license, her social security number would be audited by your firm." I watched the realization hit Andre like a physical blow. His shoulders stiffened. The air hitched in his throat. "She knew her massive debt would be discovered next week," I said, driving the final nail into the coffin. "She needed a massive influx of untraceable cash immediately to wipe out the most aggressive creditors and consolidate the rest before your compliance officers found out she was a walking bankruptcy. She could not ask you for the money without exposing her lie. So she decided to invent a catastrophic venue emergency and extort the cash from her supposedly pathetic, easily manipulated older sister." I turned my head slowly and locked eyes with Giselle. The wedding planner looked like she was going to pass out. She was gripping the edge of a table so hard the knuckles on both her hands were stark white. But Stephanie could not do it alone. I continued, my voice dripping with contempt as I addressed the trembling planner. She needed someone with industry authority to legitimize the panic. She needed someone who could produce a fake invoice on corporate letterhead and scream at me over the phone to wire the funds. Giselle was the perfect accomplice. She agreed to facilitate the wire fraud through her agency's accounts, likely taking a 20% kickback for her trouble. That is roughly $15,000 just for making a phone call and lying to a groom. Giselle opened her mouth, a high-pitched, breathless sound escaping her throat. I did not know she stammered, tears streaming down her face, completely ruining her expensive makeup. "I swear to God, Andre, I did not know she was in debt. She just told me she needed to move some family money around discreetly. I was just trying to help my client." "You were trying to commit federal wire fraud," I corrected her sharply. "You drafted a fraudulent invoice for a property you had no legal rights to, and you attempted to extort nearly $80,000 across state lines. My corporate legal team has already secured your emails and forwarded the evidence to the appropriate authorities. Your agency license is completely finished." At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the hallway slowly creaked open. Susan and Richard stumbled out onto the terrace. They had finally worked up the courage to follow me, probably hoping to interrupt my conversation and drag me away again. But one look at the scene told them they were entirely too late. They saw Andre holding the open manila folder. They saw Stephanie collapsed on the ground in her custom silk gown, weeping hysterically into her hands. They saw the horrified, repulsed faces of Andre's wealthy parents. Susan let out a soft, whimpering moan and covered her mouth with her hands. Richard stood frozen, his face completely drained of its arrogant red flush. The golden mask had not just slipped. It had been violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces, and everyone was staring at the ugly, rotting truth underneath. Andre looked up from the documents. He slowly closed the manila folder. The quiet snap of the paper echoed like a gunshot. He looked at my parents standing by the doors, then down at Stephanie sobbing at his feet. "You knew," Andre said, his voice completely hollow. He was looking at Richard and Susan. He was a man mourning the sudden death of his entire future. "You knew she was a fraud. You sat at my dinner table, drank my wine, and smiled in my face while you helped her plot to steal $80,000 from your own daughter just to protect a lie. We just wanted her to be happy," Susan cried out, her voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "We did not want to lose you, Andre. You are so good for her. We just needed a little bit of help to keep up appearances." "Keep up appearances," Andre repeated, shaking his head slowly in absolute disbelief. "You mortgaged your souls for an Instagram aesthetic." He did not scream. He did not throw the folder or flip a table. He handled the destruction of his wedding with the exact same cold, calculated precision that I used in my business. He turned away from my parents, ignoring Stephanie's desperate pleas as she tried to grab the hem of his trousers. He walked over to his parents at the head table. He simply nodded to his father. His father stood up, placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder, and quietly instructed his wife to gather her things. The wedding was officially over. The empire of lies was crumbling into dust, and I stood tall in the center of my estate, watching the ultimate consequences finally catch up to the people who had tormented me for 35 years. The heavy oak doors swing shut behind me with a solid, satisfying thud, instantly cutting off the suffocating energy of the hallway. I do not look back to see if Susan and Richard are following me. I already know they are frozen in that dim corridor, completely paralyzed by the realization that their ultimate weapon just misfired. For 13 years, they held my medical history over my head like a guillotine. They thought the shame of my past would always force me to fund their future. They truly believed that the threat of exposing my darkest, most vulnerable moments to Andre's affluent family would make me surrender my multi-million-dollar property. But shame only works if you are still trying to hide. I have nothing left to hide, and I certainly have nothing left to protect when it comes to my family. When I step back onto the Italian stone terrace, the cool Napa Valley evening breeze hits my face, washing away the stench of my parents' desperation. The atmosphere outside has shifted from an awkward, confused silence to a state of palpable dread. The string quartet has completely abandoned their instruments, standing awkwardly by the ivy-covered trellis. The catering staff has vanished into the kitchens, leaving trays of expensive appetizers abandoned on the side tables. The 50 guests are trapped in their seats, exchanging horrified glances, completely unsure of what to do. But my focus is entirely on the center of the patio. Andre and Stephanie are locked in a vicious, hushed argument. Andre is leaning forward, his hands planted firmly on his hips, his posture radiating absolute authority and barely contained fury. His voice is a low, dangerous rumble that carries easily in the quiet night air. "Do not lie to me again, Stephanie," I hear him say, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You told me your parents were covering the venue. Then you said your sister was covering it. Now the estate manager says it has been paid for months. Where was that $78,000 actually going?" Stephanie is violently shaking. She is clutching the skirt of her custom silk gown as if it is the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. Tears are streaming down her face, entirely ruining her perfect camera-ready makeup. She is hyperventilating, struggling to pull air into her lungs as her entire fabricated universe collapses around her. "I told you it is a third-party fee," she gasps, her voice trembling and high-pitched. "Giselle has the paperwork. Claire is just trying to confuse you because she wants to ruin my wedding." "She is sick, Andre. She has a history of making things up. You cannot listen to her." I walk directly toward them. My heels click rhythmically against the stone, announcing my approach with every step. Stephanie hears the sound, and her head snaps toward me. The sheer terror in her eyes is intoxicating to witness. She thought her parents had successfully dragged me away to silence me. She thought they were going to force me to transfer the deed and save her life. Seeing me walk back out completely unfazed and holding a thick manila folder destroys whatever remaining shred of hope she had of surviving this night with her lie intact. "You do not need to wait for Giselle to miraculously find a corporate invoice on her laptop, Andre," I say, my voice projecting clearly across the silent terrace. Giselle, who is still cowering near the portable bar, flinches visibly at the sound of her name. I do not even look at the wedding planner. My eyes are locked on the groom. Giselle is never going to show you that paperwork because it simply does not exist. I continue, stopping just a few feet away from them. "But I brought something much more important for you to review." I hold out the heavy folder I retrieved from my car earlier. Andre turns away from his hyperventilating bride and looks at the documents in my hand. He does not hesitate. He does not ask what it is. He reaches out and takes the folder firmly from my grasp. Stephanie lets out a blood-curdling shriek. She lunges forward, her manicured hands grasping wildly for the manila envelope. But Andre simply steps back and raises his left arm, physically blocking her from touching it. He does not even look at her. His focus is entirely on the papers. "What you are holding," I explain, keeping my tone as detached and professional as if I were leading a quarterly board meeting, "is the actual financial reality of your future wife. Stephanie has spent the last 2 years convincing you, your parents, and thousands of strangers on the internet that she is a highly successful lifestyle influencer. She told you her designer clothes, her luxury vacations, and her flawless aesthetic were funded by lucrative brand deals and inherited family wealth. That is a complete fabrication." Andre flips the folder open. The ambient light from the overhead fairy lights illuminates the crisp highlighted pages inside. Because he is a senior corporate wealth manager, he does not need me to explain how to read financial statements. His highly trained analytical brain processes the data instantly. His eyes dart across the columns. He sees the high-yield credit card statements. He sees the massive unsecured personal loans. He sees the final red ink collection notices. "Your bride does not have brand deals." I continue ensuring my words reach the head table where Andre's wealthy parents are sitting in stunned silence. She has crippling, unmanageable debt. She currently owes over $150,000 across 6 different credit cards and 2 personal loans. Those designer bags she flaunts were bought on credit. Her luxury trips were funded by payday lenders with astronomical interest rates. She has completely drained whatever small savings she had, and she has been aggressively dodging collection agencies for the past 4 months. Andre slowly turns the first page. The muscle in his jaw is jumping frantically. He is a man who builds wealth for a living, and he is looking at a financial black hole. "Why this sudden emergency today?" Andre asks. His voice is dangerously quiet. He is putting the pieces together rapidly, but he wants me to confirm the timeline. "Why demand $78,000 48 hours before the ceremony?" "Because of your promotion," I answer smoothly, delivering the final devastating piece of the puzzle. "You told the family last month that your corporate firm is officially elevating you to a senior partnership. But to finalize that partnership, the board of directors requires a mandatory, exhaustive financial background check on you and your spouse. They check everything to ensure their partners are not susceptible to blackmail or financial coercion. Stephanie knew that the moment you signed your marriage license, her social security number would be audited by your firm." The realization hits Andre like a physical blow. His broad shoulders stiffen. He looks down at the paperwork, then looks at Stephanie, who has dropped to her knees on the Italian stone, sobbing uncontrollably. "She knew her massive debt would be discovered next week," I say, driving the final nail into the coffin. "She needed a massive influx of untraceable cash immediately to wipe out the most aggressive creditors and consolidate the rest before your compliance officers found out she was a walking bankruptcy. She could not ask you for the money without exposing her lie. So she decided to invent a catastrophic venue emergency and extort the cash from her supposedly pathetic, easily manipulated older sister." At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the hallway slowly creak open. Susan and Richard stumble out onto the terrace. They have finally worked up the courage to follow me, probably hoping to interrupt my conversation and drag me away again. But one look at the scene tells them they are entirely too late. They see Andre holding the open manila folder. They see their precious golden child collapsed on the ground, weeping hysterically into her hands. They see the horrified, repulsed faces of Andre's wealthy parents. Susan lets out a soft, whimpering moan and covers her mouth with both hands. Richard stands frozen, his face completely drained of its arrogant red flush. The golden mask has not just slipped. It has been violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces, and everyone is staring at the ugly, rotting truth underneath. Andre looks up from the documents. He slowly closes the manila folder. The quiet snap of the paper echoes across the terrace like a gunshot. He looks at my parents standing by the doors, then down at Stephanie sobbing at his feet. He does not yell. He does not throw the folder. He handles the destruction of his wedding with the exact same cold, calculated precision that I use in my business. He is looking at them not as a family, but as a catastrophic liability that he has just successfully avoided. Andre's father had just placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder, preparing to guide his family away from the wreckage of the terrace. The wealthy guests were already murmuring slowly, standing up from their tables to make a discreet exit. The rehearsal dinner was effectively dead, but as Andre took his first step toward the sweeping stone staircase, he abruptly stopped. The mind of a senior wealth manager does not simply walk away from a partially audited financial disaster. He needed to expose every single fractured layer of the scheme before he closed the book on this family forever. He turned back around. He did not look at my parents, who were still standing near the heavy oak doors like statues. He did not look at Stephanie, who was weeping into the folds of her custom silk gown. He locked his eyes on Giselle. The wedding planner was desperately trying to inch her way along the ivy-covered retaining wall, hoping to slip out through the catering entrance unnoticed. Andre's deep voice stopped her dead in her tracks. "Do not take another step," Giselle Andre commanded. His tone was not loud, but it possessed a sharp, cutting authority that demanded absolute obedience. "You do not get to walk away from this until I understand exactly how you plan to launder my money." Giselle froze, her shoulders hiking up to her ears. She slowly turned around, her face completely drained of color. Andre walked back toward the center of the terrace, opening the thick manila folder I had given him once again. He flipped past the credit card statements and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printed copy of the exact fraudulent invoice Giselle had emailed to me earlier that afternoon, which I had placed in the folder as the crowning piece of evidence. "I want to hear it from you," Andre said, holding the paper up. "Claire already laid out the framework, but I want the granular details. You drafted a $78,000 invoice for a venue that was completely paid off. You were demanding a direct wire transfer. Explain the routing to me. Where exactly was this money going to go once it hit your agency account?" Giselle swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically toward the exit, but estate security had already moved to block the pathways. She looked at me, terrified of my earlier threat to involve federal authorities. "I just did what she asked me to do," Giselle cried, pointing a trembling finger at Stephanie. "She came to me panicking 2 days ago. She said she was about to be completely ruined. She told me she needed a massive influx of cash immediately, but she could not ask you because of some corporate background check. She said her sister was hoarding millions of dollars in a private equity firm and that we just needed a reason to extract it." "And your fee for facilitating this extraction?" Andre pressed, stepping closer to her. "Claire mentioned a 20% kickback. Is that correct?" Giselle squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking through her expensive eyelashes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire pits. "Stephanie promised me 20% of whatever we managed to pull from Claire. It was $15,600. I was supposed to keep that amount as a consultation premium. And the rest of the money," Andre asked, his voice cold and relentless. "The remaining $62,400. How are you going to move it without triggering a suspicious activity report with the banks?" "I was supposed to route it through my agency's secondary vendor account," Giselle confessed, completely breaking down under his interrogation. "We were going to disguise it as payments to independent floral contractors and specialty caterers. But the accounts were actually linked directly to Stephanie's creditors. I was going to wire the funds straight to the high-yield loan companies to pay off her most aggressive past-due balances. It was supposed to look like standard wedding expenses on paper." Andre stared at her with a look of profound disgust. "You were going to use your licensed event planning agency to launder extorted money and commit federal wire fraud," he stated flatly. "You were willing to risk decades in a federal penitentiary for a $15,000 kickback." Giselle sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I am so sorry, Andre. I am so sorry." Andre turned away from the weeping planner in disgust. He walked back over to where Stephanie was kneeling on the Italian stone. He looked down at the woman he had intended to marry in less than 48 hours. He looked at her not with anger, but with the cold, detached horror of a man who had just realized he was sleeping next to a stranger. He looked down at the manila folder in his hands. He began to read the line items out loud, his voice carrying clearly across the silent terrace, so that every single guest, every family member, and every catering staff member could hear the exact price of Stephanie's fake aesthetic: $150,000 in unsecured debt. Andre read his eyes scanning the highlighted documents. You owe $32,000 on a single credit card just for designer handbags and shoes. You took out a $40,000 high-interest personal loan to fund our vacation to Tulum last year, a trip you explicitly told me your parents were paying for as an engagement gift. He flipped the page, his expression darkening further. You owe $12,000 to a digital marketing agency that specializes in purchasing fake social media followers and artificially inflating engagement metrics. Your entire online presence is a purchased illusion. You do not have sponsors. You do not have brand deals. You have a collection of high-yield debt that is currently compounding at 24% interest. Stephanie reached up desperately, grabbing the fabric of Andre's trousers. Please, Andre, you have to understand the pressure I was under, she begged between ragged, breathless sobs. You do not understand what it is like. Everyone expects me to be perfect. My parents expect me to be the successful one. I had to maintain the brand. I had to look like I belonged in your world. If I did not have the clothes and the trips, your family never would have accepted me. Do not you dare put this on my family, Andre snapped, taking a sharp step backward to break her grip. My family valued you because they thought you were genuine. They thought you were a hard-working, independent woman. They do not care about designer bags. They care about integrity. I was going to pay it all back. Stephanie cried, her voice echoing off the stone walls. I swear to God, Andre, I had a plan. Once we were married, I was going to use the joint accounts to slowly pay off the balances. I was going to get real sponsorships once my profile was bigger. I just needed this one bailout to get the collection agencies off my back before your firm ran the background check. The absolute silence that followed her confession was deafening. She had just admitted in front of 50 people that her ultimate plan was to secretly siphon money from Andre's corporate wealth accounts to pay for the fake life she had built before she met him. She was planning to infect his pristine financial record with her toxic debt. Andre let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He shook his head, looking at her as if she were a completely alien creature. You were going to use my money, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You were going to secretly embezzle from our joint accounts to cover your fraud. Do you have any idea what would have happened if you had succeeded tonight? He did not wait for her to answer. If you had managed to extort this money from your sister and my firm had run that background check next week, the compliance officers would have found the newly paid-off accounts. They would have traced the massive sudden influx of cash. They would have seen that it came from an event planner's shell account. They would have flagged it as money laundering. The federal regulators would have been called. My promotion would have been immediately revoked, I would have been fired, and I likely would have been indicted for conspiracy to commit wire fraud just by being legally tied to you. Stephanie stared at him, her eyes wide with terror as the reality of her actions finally crashed down upon her. She had not just been trying to save her aesthetic. She had been recklessly steering them both toward federal prison. You did not just lie to me, Stephanie, Andre said, his voice completely hollow. You tried to destroy my career, my reputation, and my family's legacy just so you could keep pretending to be someone you are not. And when the walls started closing in, you and your parents decided to completely destroy your own sister to save yourself. Andre dropped the thick manila folder directly onto the stone floor in front of her. The pages spilled out, scattering the undeniable proof of her financial ruin across the ground. He stepped over the papers, turning his back on her completely. He walked over to where I was standing. He stopped just a few feet away from me. He did not look angry anymore. He looked incredibly tired, but there was a deep, profound respect in his eyes that had never been there before. He looked at my tailored suit. He looked at the massive, beautifully renovated estate surrounding us. He finally saw the reality that my family had spent 35 years trying to hide from the world. "You have an incredibly beautiful property," Claire Andre said quietly, his voice perfectly calm. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention before it was too late. I sincerely apologize for the way I spoke to you earlier. I was completely blind." "You were working with the information you were given," I replied evenly, giving him a brief, respectful nod. "I am sorry your evening had to end this way." Andre nodded once. He walked past me, joining his parents at the top of the terrace stairs. They did not say a single word to my mother or father as they passed them. They simply walked out the front gates, leaving the nightmare behind them forever. Stephanie's scream ripped through the quiet Napa Valley air, an ugly grating sound that completely shattered whatever remained of her carefully curated aesthetic. I looked down at her, a 32-year-old woman wearing a custom silk gown, kneeling on Italian stone, throwing a temper tantrum because she had finally been caught. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for lying to her fiancé. She was not apologizing for trying to extort $80,000 from me or plotting to embezzle from Andre's corporate accounts. She was only furious that I had refused to be her victim. "You ruined your own life, Stephanie," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "I just refused to let you ruin mine to pay for it." Susan and Richard finally broke out of their paralyzed state near the heavy oak doors. They rushed forward, completely abandoning any remaining shred of dignity. Susan dropped to the ground next to Stephanie, wrapping her arms around the sobbing bride, glaring up at me as if I were a monster who had just attacked an innocent child. Richard stepped right into Andre's personal space, holding his hands up in a desperate, placating gesture. "Andre, please," Richard begged, his voice cracking with panic. "You have to understand the immense pressure she was under. She loves you. She just wanted to be perfect for you and your family. Women make silly mistakes with credit cards all the time. It is just money. We can fix this. We can sit down with our accountants tomorrow and sort this whole mess out. Do not throw away a beautiful relationship over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Andre repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Your daughter and her wedding planner just conspired to commit federal wire fraud. She has $150,000 in secret debt, and she was planning to use my corporate income to secretly pay off loan sharks." "That is not a silly mistake, Richard. That is a calculated, predatory financial crime." Susan looked up from where she was clutching Stephanie. "We will pay it back," Susan cried out, her voice desperate and shrill. "We will take care of her debt, Andre. Just please do not cancel the wedding. The deposits are all paid. Your family flew all the way out here. We will cover her credit cards. We will clear the balances before the background check next week. Just give us a few days to move some assets around." I actually let out a short, hollow laugh at that. "Move what assets?" "Susan," I asked, stepping closer to them. "You do not have $150,000 in liquid cash. You do not even have retirement savings." "We have equity," Richard snapped at me, his face turning a deep, angry red. He turned back to Andre, desperate to prove his financial worth. "We are perfectly capable of supporting our daughter. We have plenty of equity in our home. We can take out a line of credit tomorrow morning and wipe her slate clean. You will never have to deal with her past balances, Andre. We promise." But Richard was panicking, and people who are panicking rarely keep their stories straight. In his desperate attempt to look wealthy and capable, he forgot the reality of his own financial situation. "You cannot take out a line of credit against your home." "Richard," I said quietly. "Stay out of this, Claire," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I am not staying out of it because you are lying to him again." I pushed back, my voice ringing out with absolute authority. "You do not have any equity left. You took out a second mortgage on that house 18 months ago." The color instantly drained from Richard's face. He froze, his mouth opening and closing silently. Susan stopped stroking Stephanie's hair, her entire body going rigid on the stone floor. Andre looked at my father, his analytical mind rapidly processing this new devastating piece of information. "You took out a second mortgage?" Andre asked, the disgust in his voice deepening. "Why would you leverage your primary residence?" Richard could not answer. He looked at Susan, entirely trapped. But I knew exactly why they had done it. "Tell him, Richard," I demanded. "Tell the senior wealth manager why you leveraged your only tangible asset." When Richard remained silent, staring at the ground in profound shame, I looked directly at Andre and delivered the final blow to my parents' illusion. "They took out the second mortgage to fund her aesthetic," I said, pointing down at my sister. "When Stephanie decided she wanted to be a full-time lifestyle influencer, she demanded they provide the seed money. They drained their savings to buy her designer wardrobes, hire professional photographers, and pay for her luxury apartment lease so she could film content in a high-end kitchen. When the savings ran out, they borrowed against their house. They are completely financially ruined, Andre. They are drowning in debt just to keep up appearances, and they were banking on this marriage to save them all." The silence that followed was absolute. The grand, sprawling Napa Valley estate suddenly felt incredibly small. Andre's parents, who had been standing quietly near the top of the stairs, exchanged a look of profound horror. They were looking at a family that was fundamentally diseased. My parents had mortgaged their own future to buy fake social media followers for their golden child, and when the money ran out, they had fully supported her plan to extort my life savings. Andre took a slow, deep breath. He reached up and unclipped the small wireless microphone from the lapel of his custom suit. He had been wearing it all evening, preparing to give a warm, romantic toast to his beautiful new bride and her welcoming family. He looked down at the small black device in his hand, then dropped it onto the nearest cocktail table. It landed with a dull, hollow thud. "We are done," Andre said. His voice carried no anger anymore. It carried nothing but absolute freezing finality. "Andre, no." Stephanie screamed. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, grabbing his polished dress shoes. "Please, I love you. I can change. I will delete my social media. I will sell the bags. Please do not leave me here." Andre stepped back, pulling his shoes out of her desperate grasp. "Do not contact me again, Stephanie. Do not call my office, and do not reach out to my family. If you or your parents attempt to contact me, I will have my firm's legal team file a restraining order for harassment and turn this entire manila folder over to the district attorney." He turned away from her and looked at Richard and Susan. "And if I find out you attempt to retaliate against Claire for exposing this," he added, his voice dropping into a menacing register, "I will personally fund her legal defense. Good evening." Andre walked over to his parents. He did not say a word to them. He simply nodded toward the driveway. His father placed a supportive hand on his shoulder, and his mother shot one final pitying look at my family before turning her back on them forever. They walked down the stone stairs, moving with the quiet grace of people who knew exactly who they were and what they stood for. The affluent guests immediately followed their lead. They did not say goodbye. They did not offer sympathies. They gathered their expensive coats and purses, filtering out through the grand wrought iron gates, like ghosts escaping a haunted house. Within 3 minutes, the terrace was completely empty of Andre's family. The string quartet had quietly packed up their instruments and slipped out the side entrance. The catering staff remained hidden in the kitchens, entirely unwilling to step into the blast radius of our family meltdown. I stood in the center of the patio, surrounded by half-empty champagne flutes and untouched plates of caviar. Stephanie was lying flat on the Italian stone, sobbing so violently her entire body shook. Susan was sitting next to her, staring blankly ahead, completely catatonic, as the reality of her ruined social standing and massive debt finally crushed her. Richard was leaning heavily against a stone pillar, his face buried in his hands, looking 20 years older than he had just an hour prior. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a sudden movement near the portable bar. Giselle. The wedding planner had used the chaos of Andre's departure to slowly creep toward the catering exit. She had her silver clipboard tucked under her arm and was clutching her designer tote bag, hoping she could just slip away into the Napa Valley night and pretend none of this had ever happened. I turned my head and locked eyes with her, just as her hand reached for the wrought iron gate latch. "I would not do that if I were you, Giselle," I called out. My voice cut through Stephanie's sobbing echoing off the stone walls. Giselle froze. She slowly turned around, her face pale and streaked with mascara. "I am leaving," she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "My contract is officially terminated. The groom canceled the event. I have nothing else to do here." "Your contract with my sister might be terminated," I replied, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "But your liability with my corporation is just beginning. You tried to extort an $80,000 fraudulent invoice from a property that I legally own. You used your licensed agency to facilitate an attempted embezzlement scheme." "Please, Claire," Giselle begged, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I am ruined. The groom's family is never going to hire me. They are going to blacklist me across the entire industry. I have lost everything. Just let me go. I will not charge Stephanie for the planning fees. Just let me leave. You are going to leave your laptop, your files, and every single digital device connected to this wedding in the bridal suite." I commanded my tone, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "My estate manager, Dominic, will escort you to the room to ensure you do not delete any emails or financial records. You will hand over the hard drives, and then you will walk off my property. If I find out you deleted a single file related to that fake invoice, my corporate attorneys will file federal wire fraud charges against you first thing tomorrow morning. Do we understand each other?" Giselle stared at me, completely broken. She realized I was not making an idle threat. I was the owner of the estate, and she had just handed me all the evidence I needed to destroy her business and put her in prison. She gave a jerky, terrified nod. "Yes," she whispered. "Good," I said. I raised my hand and signaled to Dominic, who had been standing quietly in the shadows near the kitchen entrance the entire time. "Show her to the bridal suite, Dominic. And then show her out." I watched as Dominic escorted the weeping wedding planner off the terrace. The air suddenly felt incredibly still. The grand, expensive rehearsal dinner had been completely dismantled, leaving nothing but the absolute ugly truth in its wake. I turned back around to face the three people remaining on the patio: my parents and my sister, the people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. It was time for them to leave my house. I stepped forward, the sound of my heels echoing in the newly emptied space. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing. Susan, Richard, and Stephanie were still clustered together on the stone floor. Stephanie's cries had reduced to exhausted hiccups. Richard was staring at the ground, his shoulders slumped in total defeat, while Susan looked up at me with a mixture of hatred and absolute terror. They had nothing left. The wealthy groom was gone. The fake aesthetic was shattered. Their house was leveraged to the breaking point, and the daughter they had treated like a walking ATM was the only one holding any power. I looked at the three of them, feeling a profound, heavy silence settle over my chest. There was no anger left in me. There was only a clinical need to clear my property. "You need to leave," I said, my voice calm and unwavering. "You need to gather your things, walk out the front gates, and leave my estate right now." Susan blinked, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process the command. "You are throwing us out," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It is the middle of the night. We do not have a car." Andre drove the rental vehicle back to the city. "Where are we supposed to go?" "You can go wherever you want, Susan," I replied, crossing my arms. "But you cannot stay here. You can call an Uber. You can call a taxi. You can walk back to the highway for all I care. But your presence on my property is officially trespassing." Richard finally looked up, his face twisted in a pathetic attempt at parental authority. "You cannot do this to your own family, Claire. We are your parents. Your sister is having the worst night of her life. Have some basic human decency." "Human decency?" I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. You spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. You stood in my hallway 20 minutes ago and threatened to expose my medical trauma to strangers just to steal my real estate. You do not get to invoke the concept of family to save yourselves from the consequences of your own abuse. Get off my property before I have Dominic call the local police. The threat of law enforcement was the final push they needed. Richard knew I was not bluffing. He reached down, grabbing Susan by the arm and pulling her to her feet. He did not say another word to me. He bent down and hoisted Stephanie up, practically dragging the golden child across the Italian stone. Stephanie did not fight him. She looked completely hollowed out, her custom silk gown stained with tears and dirt from the patio. I watched them slowly make their way toward the grand staircase, a pathetic procession of broken illusions. I did not stay on the terrace to watch them wait. I turned around, walked through the heavy oak doors, and made my way up the grand curving staircase of the main house. I opened the French doors leading out to the private balcony that overlooked the front driveway and the sweeping vineyards beyond. I leaned against the wrought iron railing, the cool breeze rustling the leaves of the ancient oak trees. Below me, the driveway was bathed in the soft glow of the security lights. I could see my parents and my sister standing near the grand entrance gates. They were huddled together in their expensive formal clothing, staring down at their phones. They were likely trying to order a luxury rideshare service back to San Francisco, a trip that would easily cost them several $100s they no longer had. The irony was palpable. They had spent thousands of dollars on a fake aesthetic, and now they were stranded on the gravel driveway of the daughter they had endlessly mocked. I watched them shivering in the cool night air. The catering trucks were beginning to pull out of the service entrance, the staff efficiently dismantling the massive rehearsal dinner setup. The fairy lights on the terrace were slowly being switched off, plunging the space back into a peaceful, quiet darkness. The extravagant wedding was completely erased, leaving absolutely no trace of Stephanie's delusions behind. I stood on the balcony for a long time, watching the distant headlights of an approaching car wind its way up the valley road. It pulled up to the gates. I saw my father open the door of the rideshare vehicle, pushing Stephanie and Susan inside before climbing in himself. The car turned around, its red taillights slowly fading into the darkness as it drove away, taking 35 years of emotional abuse, manipulation, and toxicity out of my life forever. I did not feel a single shred of pity. I did not feel guilt. I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of peace. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried on my shoulders since childhood was finally gone. I was entirely free. I stepped back into the master suite, leaving the French doors open to let the fresh air circulate through the room. I walked back downstairs, the house completely silent now. I made my way past the grand kitchen and opened the heavy wooden door leading down to my private wine cellar. I walked past the rows of imported bottles until I found exactly what I was looking for. It was a rare $500 vintage Cabernet Sauvignon I had purchased the day I closed the deal on this estate. I had been saving it for a special occasion, waiting for the right moment to celebrate my independence. Tonight was the perfect occasion. I pulled the bottle from the rack, grabbed a crystal wine glass, and used a silver corkscrew to open it. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The taste was complex, bold, and incredibly satisfying. I walked back upstairs, carrying my glass through the empty, beautifully decorated rooms of my home. I walked out onto the back terrace one last time. The fire pits had burned down to glowing embers. The sky above Napa Valley was clear, a massive canopy of bright, shining stars. I took another sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I thought about the scared, exhausted 22-year-old girl crying in a hospital room. I thought about the woman who worked 80-hour weeks to build an empire from nothing. I thought about the family who had blindly assumed I was a failure simply because I refused to play their toxic games. They had spent my entire life trying to define my worth. They had spent 35 years telling me I was a disappointment, that I was difficult, that I did not belong at their prestigious table. They were right about one thing. I did not belong at their table. But it was not because I was unworthy. It was because they were sitting at a table built entirely on lies, debt, and cruel manipulation. I did not belong at their table because I owned the whole damn restaurant. I had built my own table on my own property with my own hands. I had secured my own future and I had protected my peace. The days of shrinking myself to fit into their small, fragile world were permanently over. From this night forward, the only people allowed in my life would be those who respected me, valued my boundaries, and brought genuine love into my space. The toxic chapter was closed, and the rest of my life was finally mine to write. Have you ever had to walk away from a family that constantly undervalued your worth and tried to exploit your success? Have you ever had to draw a hard line in the sand and protect your own peace at all costs? I would absolutely love to hear your stories and experiences in the comments below. Sharing our journeys helps us realize that we are never alone in these struggles. If my story resonated with you, if you felt that sense of justice and liberation, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, boundaries, and taking back your power. Always remember your worth is never determined by people who are blind. Until next time, stay incredibly strong, stay completely true to yourself. The heavy oak doors of the main house remained firmly shut behind Dominic as he escorted the weeping wedding planner off the property. I stood in the center of the Italian stone terrace, the cool Napa Valley night air finally clearing the suffocating tension that had gripped the space for the last hour. The silence that settled over the estate was profound. It was not the awkward, heavy silence of a family trying to ignore a problem. It was the clean, crisp silence of absolute resolution. I turned my attention back to the three people still lingering near the edge of the patio: my parents and my sister. Stephanie was still kneeling on the ground. She looked entirely broken. Her custom white silk gown, the one she had undoubtedly purchased on a high-yield credit card, was stained with dirt and spilled champagne. Her perfectly styled hair had fallen out of its expensive pins, hanging in loose, messy strands around her tear-streaked face. She was not crying for the loss of the man she loved. She was crying for the loss of her brand, her aesthetic, and her financial bailout. Richard and Susan stood paralyzed next to her. They looked like two people who had just watched their entire house burn to the ground only to realize they were the ones who had struck the match. They had spent my entire life placing all their bets on the golden child. They had drained their savings, leveraged their primary residence, and destroyed their relationship with their oldest daughter, all to ensure Stephanie looked successful. Now the illusion was dead, and they were left holding the massive compounding debt. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I looked at my father and delivered the final directive of the night. "It is time for you to leave," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and completely devoid of the desperate need for approval that had plagued my youth. "You need to gather whatever belongings you brought with you, walk down to the front gates, and leave my property immediately." Susan let out a pathetic, ragged sob. "Claire, please," she begged, taking a trembling step toward me. "We do not have a car. Andre took the rental SUV when he left. We are stranded out here in the middle of wine country. Where are we supposed to go? It is late. You cannot just throw your own family out onto the street." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing. "You threw me out onto the street when I was 18 years old because you wanted to convert my bedroom into a walk-in closet for Stephanie," I reminded her coldly. "You charged me rent to live in a damp basement while I worked 3 jobs to pay for community college. Do not stand on my multi-million-dollar estate and lecture me about family loyalty. You can order a rideshare. You can call a taxi. You can start walking. I do not care what you do, but you are not spending another second on my land." Richard opened his mouth, perhaps to issue one final blustering threat, but the absolute finality in my eyes stopped him dead. He realized finally that he had zero leverage. He reached down, grabbed Stephanie by her arm, and hauled her roughly to her feet. He did not say a word to me. He did not look back. He dragged his weeping golden child toward the stone stairs with Susan trailing behind them like a ghost. I watched them walk away, their expensive shoes scraping against the stone. I did not stay on the terrace to supervise their exit. I turned around, walked through the heavy wooden doors, and entered the quiet sanctuary of my home. I climbed the grand curving staircase, my hand trailing along the polished mahogany banister. I walked through the master suite and pushed open the French doors that led out onto the expansive private balcony overlooking the front of the estate. I leaned against the cool wrought iron railing and looked down. The caterers were already moving with quiet efficiency, packing up the crystal glasses, the silver trays, and the expensive floral arrangements. The grand rehearsal dinner was being dismantled, piece by piece erased, as if it had never happened. Beyond the manicured lawns near the massive iron security gates, I could see my family. They were standing awkwardly on the gravel shoulder of the private road. Andre was long gone, having taken the luxury rental SUV back to San Francisco. My parents and my sister were huddled together in the chilly night air, their designer clothes providing no warmth against the harsh reality of their situation. I could see the glow of my father's phone screen, illuminating his angry, flushed face as he undoubtedly tried to secure a premium Uber to take them back to the city. It was a ride that would easily cost them several $100s, pulling from bank accounts that were already drowning in red ink. They looked small, they looked pathetic, and as I watched them shiver in the dark, I realized I did not feel a single shred of pity. I stepped back into my bedroom, leaving the balcony doors open to let the fresh breeze circulate. I walked back downstairs, the house feeling incredibly vast and peaceful. I bypassed the main kitchen and opened the heavy temperature-controlled door that led down to my private wine cellar. The air down here was cool and smelled of aged oak and rich earth. I walked past rows of imported bottles, my fingers lightly grazing the glass until I found exactly what I was looking for. It was a rare $500 vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. I had purchased this specific bottle 3 years ago on the exact day my private equity firm officially closed the acquisition deal for this estate. I had promised myself I would not open it until I felt I had truly achieved absolute freedom. Tonight was the night. I pulled the heavy bottle from the wooden rack, grabbed a thick crystal wine glass, and used a silver corkscrew to extract the cork. The deep ruby red liquid poured smoothly into the glass. I took the glass and walked back upstairs, moving through the beautifully decorated rooms of the house I had rebuilt from ruin. I walked out onto the back terrace. The catering staff had finished their work and departed, leaving the patio completely empty. I walked to the edge of the terrace and looked out over the sweeping moonlit vineyards. The neat rows of grapevines stretched out for acres, a testament to hard work, strategic investment, and unyielding determination. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. It was complex, bold, and tasted exactly like victory. I thought about the 35 years I had spent shrinking myself to make my family comfortable. I thought about the holidays I spent sitting silently at the edge of the room, listening to them brag about Stephanie's imaginary brand deals, while treating my corporate career like a cute little hobby. They spent their entire lives telling me I was a disappointment. They constantly reminded me that I did not fit their aesthetic, that I was difficult, that I simply did not belong at their prestigious table. As I looked out over my land, I realized they were absolutely right. I did not belong at their table. Their table was built on a foundation of lies, secret debt, and cruel manipulation. Their table was currently collapsing under the weight of a second mortgage and fraudulent invoices. I did not belong at their table because I owned the whole damn restaurant. The aftermath of that night played out exactly as one would expect when a financial house of cards collapses. Andre did not look back. He canceled the wedding contracts the very next morning. A week later, he sent a massive, incredibly generous floral arrangement to my corporate office with a handwritten note thanking me for saving him from the biggest financial mistake of his life. His firm completed his background check, his senior partnership was finalized, and he moved on with his highly successful career completely untouched by my sister's toxicity. Giselle, the overpriced wedding planner, did not fare as well. True to my word, my corporate legal team forwarded the fraudulent $78,000 invoice, along with the digital communications retrieved by my estate manager, to the proper authorities. Giselle lost her event planning license, her agency went bankrupt, and she narrowly avoided federal prison time by fully cooperating with the investigation into her money laundering practices. As for my family, the destruction was absolute. Without Andre's wealth to bail her out, Stephanie's creditors immediately closed in. She was forced to sell every single designer handbag, every pair of luxury shoes, and every piece of jewelry she owned just to keep from being sued into oblivion. Her influencer aesthetic was entirely destroyed. She had to delete her social media accounts to escape the humiliation when the truth about her fake wealth began to circulate among her former friends. With no income and massive compounding debt, she had to break the lease on her luxury apartment and move back into my parents' house. But that house was no longer the comfortable sanctuary it used to be. Richard and Susan were completely crushed under the weight of the second mortgage they had taken out to fund Stephanie's lies. With the wedding canceled and their social reputation in ruins, they could no longer afford the monthly payments. 6 months after the disaster in Napa Valley, they were forced to put the brick colonial house on the market. They had to downsize to a small, cramped apartment in a much less prestigious neighborhood. They were right back where they started, completely stripped of the wealth they had desperately pretended to possess. They never reached out to apologize to me. Toxic people rarely do. They likely spent their days sitting in their small apartment blaming me for exposing their lies rather than taking accountability for creating them. But their silence was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. My private equity firm continued to thrive. We acquired 3 more distressed luxury properties the following year, expanding our portfolio and solidifying our reputation in the commercial real estate market. My life is filled with genuine friends, supportive colleagues, and a profound sense of peace that can only come from living entirely in your own truth. I no longer seek validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding me. I no longer try to buy the love of people who only saw me as a transaction. Have you ever found yourself desperately trying to secure a seat at a table where you were never truly respected? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most, simply to protect your own future and your own sanity? I would absolutely love to hear your experiences and your stories in the comments below. Sharing our journeys reminds us that walking away from toxicity is not a failure. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the profound satisfaction of that final realization, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about setting unbreakable boundaries and taking back your power. Always remember, your worth is never determined by those who cannot afford to appreciate you. Until next time, stay incredibly strong and always build your own table.